Welcome, everyone. We are so delighted to begin our Colorism and Skin Lightening, Addressing an Epidemic of Mercury Poisoning event webinar. And I want to take a moment to state we are on stolen land, and I want to share the agreed upon land acknowledgement of all 11 tribes in Minnesota through MIAC. I'm standing on traditional and ancestral Dakota land, and I want to take this opportunity and every opportunity moving forward to acknowledge the colonial and genocidal histories that are woven into this land. The founding of institutions such as Hamline came at a dire cost to the Dakota people. The Dakota were forced to cede their lands in return for goods and services, but the government did not uphold the terms of these treaties, leading to widespread devastation. We recognize this painful past, and we honor Dakota people's history on this land, their sovereignty, and their continued contributions to our region. Minnesota comes from the Dakota name for this region, Minnesota Makoke, the land where the waters reflect the skies. The Dakota and numerous other indigenous peoples whose cultural, spiritual, and economic practices are intrinsically woven to this land hold this land sacred. We recognize them as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it who had thriving and vibrant communities prior to disruption by settlers. Today, the state of Minnesota shares geography with 11 tribal nations. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm tribal sovereignty and hold Hamline and the Center for Justice and Law accountable to recognize and counter the historical and contemporary injustices that continue to impact Indigenous people through mutually beneficial partnerships, research, policies, and practices that respect indigeneity. I'm Susi Keefe, Professor of Public Health and Sociology at Carleton University and the current Director for the Center for Justice and Law. Welcome to our event. Today we have over 100 people attending our event from universities as close as the University of Minnesota and as far away as Boston, California, England, and India. We welcome organizations working to address racial and health equity from around the US and around the world. The mission of the Center for Justice and Law is to develop creative, concrete, and equitable solutions to legal issues and policy concerns through teaching, research, and active collaboration with community partners and policymakers. This year, with the continuance of COVID-19 and an international movement for racial justice, we recognize this moment calls for a radical reckoning of the depths of inequality in this country and across the world. In service to this, we aim to center all of our events around the following 3 commitments: employing an anti-racist lens, including our choice of speakers, content, branding, and facilitation; centering community members as experts in identifying and designing solutions to the challenges that we face; and to be inspired to act on the problems of our society. Our theme this year is immigrant and refugee health, justice, and the law. As our team came together this year to decide on our theme, we recognized that most of our team held immigrant refugee identities. And my own mother was an immigrant to the United States at the age of 17 and navigated numerous challenges as a single parent without citizenship until I was 7. So our team brings our personal experiences navigating systems that overlook or create unnecessary challenges for those with immigrant and refugee backgrounds. This overarching theme touches on important subjects that address health and justice while providing a space to amplify immigrant and refugee voices and experiences, which are both significant topics in our nation, Minnesota, and our own community campus. Today, we all come together in community to discuss colorism and skin lightening. This topic continues to be a serious issue that receives little attention, but impacts our local and global BIPOC communities. I was first called into this work in the summer of 2017 when I met with the Minnesota Department of Health and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency working group for skin lightening, who had formed this group to address mercury poisoning among BIPOC communities in Minnesota. In response to what I learned and the opportunity to partner with this working group, I designed the Public Health Senior Seminar to conduct community engaged research for the first time ever at Hamline. Today, you will have a chance to hear from some of the students who took that course, where we conducted focus groups with Hmong college students from 3 area colleges. This work was later published in the Hmong Studies Journal and presented at conferences with collaborators who are here today. Further, the Minnesota Department of Health was able to use the student-created deliverables in their outreach at places like the Hmong Town Market here in St. Paul. I am thrilled our event today will also allow students who have now graduated and gone on to do their own important work in the field of public health, equity, and justice. Skin lightening is a global billion-dollar industry, and people of color worldwide are negatively impacted by racism and colorism. Colorism is the discrimination that privileges light-skinned people over people with darker skin. The shade of a person's skin affects people in the following areas: jobs and earning potential, education opportunities, social status, perceptions of beauty, and even marriage potential. These are not insignificant consequences. We regularly hear admonishments for people to love their body, to love their skin, to individually make different decisions. But we also know this is unlikely to be effective. Change will not come without acknowledgement and engagement with how colorism and racism are at work and at play here. I am thrilled with the incredible lineup of folks you will hear from today, and know we will all benefit from their wisdom. A few notes about today's event. For each of our keynotes and panels, we will accept questions throughout the event in the chat. So as your questions come to you, please feel free to type them in, and our student coordinators will make sure that they are funneled to our speakers, and that we will do our best to address all of those questions. We will begin today with a short plenary setting the stage for the epidemiology context of mercury poisoning in Minnesota, followed by a keynote from Kavitha Emmanuel, the director of Dark is Beautiful, joining us from India. We will have a panel consisting of community conversation on colorism, and our second keynote, Dr. Amina Mire, followed by a second panel on the future of skin lightening. We have shared our panelists' bios and photos with you ahead of time, and we'll share again now in the chat. That also includes today's agenda. The panelists have all agreed to introduce themselves more informally today as they speak, but you can look at that document as we go to connect with sort of the more robust bios that have been provided. We are streaming today's event. If you step away or wish to revisit any of what is shared here today, it will be archived and available at our Center for Justice and Law Facebook website. All registrants will be emailed the link after the event. We don't have any scheduled breaks today, but please feel free to grab your lunch and take any breaks as needed. We'll be here continuing. And with that, I'm going to invite our student coordinator, Brenda, to introduce our first speaker. Thank you for being here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brenda. I am a senior majoring in public health at Hamline University. I am very excited to be introducing our first Plenary speaker, Dr. Jessica Nelson. Dr. Nelson is a program director and epidemiologist with the Minnesota Department of Health. She has served as the principal investigator for different biomonitoring projects, including the Minnesota Family Environmental Exposure Tracking, or Minnesota FEE, studies that measure heavy metals in the Twin Cities women and babies. This is very important as studies have shown links using skin lightening creams to high levels of mercury in urine. Dr. Nelson's studies have shown that it's an important matter to have a conversation on how skin lightening products impact health. We are very excited to welcome you, Dr. Jessica Nelson. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. My microphone a little bit here. Good morning. Thanks for that introduction. I'm going to share my slides. Good morning. Thanks again. Thanks for the introduction. And I really appreciate the chance to be part of this important conference today. So I'm Jessica. As was said, I'm an epidemiologist and program director at the Minnesota Department of Health. And my talk will be more of an overview of skin lightening, specifically a little more about mercury health impacts, and then some work happening in Minnesota to kind of set a background for the rest of the day's conversations. As we'll be hearing a lot more about today, skin lightening products can be used for a variety of different reasons, for skin bleaching, to lighten skin tone or to even out skin tone, to help with spots from aging or from sun, to help with melasma from pregnancy or other kinds of skin and medical conditions, And as Susi mentioned, this practice has very deep roots in colorism, which places higher value and privilege on people with lighter skin compared to people with darker skins. And I'm really looking forward to the conversations today about ways to address this injustice. Skin lightening products can come in different forms, so creams, powders that might be added to a lotion or cream, soaps, deodorants. We came across one product that was labeled as an exfoliating scrub. Products that have mercury in them are banned in Minnesota, but we know that they're available at local markets and certainly quite widely online. And the 4 pictures along the bottom are all pictures of products that we've obtained and that have tested positive for mercury. There are different harmful chemicals that might be in these products. Folks have probably heard about these, but just to go through them again. And the problem, of course, is that you can't trust the label. So it will not necessarily say, especially with mercury, it will not necessarily say if mercury is in the product, and you cannot see the chemical or smell the chemical. There's no way to know what is actually in these products. So mercury is a big concern, of course, and I'll be, like I said, focusing a little bit more on mercury today. It's a naturally occurring metal that is toxic, and it is added to beauty products. What it does actually is to reduce the amount of melanin in the skin, so it has this lightening effect. But there can also be hydroquinone and steroids in these products, and these are used for skin conditions, but they're done so with the supervision of a healthcare provider, usually for short-term use, because some of them are very potent and they're not intended for long-term ongoing use. And the problem with getting a sort of non-prescription version from a source that you may not know is that it could have very high levels of the steroids. They're not regulated, and there could be other ingredients in these products as well. So a little bit more about the health effects that we're concerned with. So for mercury, kidney damage is a big concern. Skin issues, a severe rash can be one of these. And then there's a range of neurological symptoms that can present. And these are a little sort of general and vague, but they can include anxiety, memory loss, depression, fatigue, also irritability, weight loss, kind of things in this category. With hydroquinone and steroids, there can also be skin issues, dermatitis, all the way up to more severe skin rashes and other issues. And then harmful effects on the nervous and endocrine systems. And I want to emphasize a particular concern for pregnant women and breastfeeding women with exposure to these chemicals. We know that developing babies are quite often more vulnerable to exposures to chemicals in the environment. And we know that these groups of women, excuse me, do use these products. So that's a population that we've tried to focus on in our work. We issued a health advisory January of last year, which of course seems like forever ago now, but this documented the first known case we had in Minnesota of acute health effects associated with a skin lightening product. There certainly have been examples from other states, but this was the first state that came through to, the first case that came through to us. I don't think this means it was the first case in our state, just the first one that we were able to find out about. Then the purpose of these is really to communicate with healthcare providers and about ways that they can educate their the clients that they work with. So this was actually in a woman who had used the product for medical reasons, and she presented with severe kidney effects, and they kind of worked their way back to what the exposure might be. She ordered this cream through Walmart Marketplace. I think she also got it on Amazon. So, you know, the message to healthcare providers here was, please consider discussing this with your patients, particularly patients that might be at higher risk for using these products. And then also, if patients are presenting with some of these symptoms, please consider mercury exposure as a possible cause. We think that a lot of providers probably are not considering mercury exposure, especially when it comes to some of the neurological symptoms I mentioned that can be a little more general or associated with a lot of different things. So when these products are used, there can be different ways that a person is actually exposed. So absorbing through the skin from, you know, putting the product on the skin, ingesting through the mouth, if, you know, there's hand to mouth contact, or the hands touch something else that's going into the mouth. Also breathing contaminated air, because when these are used inside, the mercury vapors are present in that indoor environment. And then we know that household items like towels and clothing that have come into contact with the products, either through wiping through skin or even in washing machines, that these can be contaminated and provide a source of exposure. So there's different ways that people are actually coming into contact with the mercury in this case. At the Department of Health, we work with our partner, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, to periodically obtain and then test products that we get locally. The most recent update you see here is from July of this year, and that longer URL at the bottom is where this document lives. But a large proportion of these products that we test contain mercury. Some of them have steroids and mercury. Some of them just have steroids or hydroquinone. This is a 22-page document now. It's growing. There are over 90 products on this list at this time, but it's a very useful resource. It has pictures of all the products and some information about whether it was mercury or steroids tested and at what levels. I now am going to share a few slides on some work we've been doing at the Department of Health to address this issue through biomonitoring, which is measuring chemicals in people's bodies. And for this issue of Skin Lightening, we have done work over time on testing mercury in urine, which tells us about exposure to the type of mercury that's most often found in skin creams. So we did a study that was mentioned a while back called MinFEAT. We released these results in 2019. So we measured 3 different heavy metals, mercury, lead, and cadmium, in pregnant women and babies from the Twin Cities. We focused on Asian, East African, Latina, and white women in the study because we were concerned that women from some of these groups could be having higher exposure to these chemicals, and especially to mercury. So we asked for women to give consent to do a short survey over the phone, and then when they came to the hospital for their baby's birth, for the staff to collect a sample of their baby's cord blood and then urine from the mom. And those were tested for the metals. Women did receive gift cards as thank you. They got results, and then there was special follow-up offered for cases where chemical levels were high. And this included, for mercury, offering a home visit that could check for contamination in the home, which turned out to be a really important part of the study. So here are some findings. We did find that women who said they had used a skin lightening product in the past, this was 46 women, you can see, had higher urine mercury levels than women who didn't. The bars are showing the average urine mercury levels. It's not a huge difference, but it was a significant difference. And even more, there were some women, 9 women, who had what we defined as high elevated urine mercury levels. And the follow-up that we did with these women showed that skin lightening was the main reason that urine levels were high. It wasn't the case in every single one of these, for every single one of these women, but the majority were. And like I mentioned, we were able to do these home visits with our partners at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and local public health. This machine, the blue machine there on that table, is a handheld mercury analyzer, so it can check for mercury in the air. And so if the woman agreed, they were able to visit the home and check to see, was there mercury in the washing area or in the bathroom where their products had been stored. They could check all different products that the family may have had at that home. And these visits did show that mercury from these products was putting mercury into the air that the whole family might be breathing. One really striking example was there was I think a relatively small jar of skin cream. Just by taking the lid off that jar, this handheld air analyzer pretty much instantly maxed out its readings. It very quickly got to maximum readings. And that product was being stored in a bedroom, I believe, where kids and other family members were sleeping. So from MinFEAT, we found that some women, Asian women, especially Hmong women, Latino women, and East African women may be in danger of higher exposures through these skin lightening products. Currently at MDH, we've been doing a series of clinical projects where we screen patients for urine mercury. This works well with prenatal patients because they're coming in a lot to give urine samples anyway, and we just sort of add the mercury onto that. We've worked with 2 community clinics in the Twin Cities and 1 in Rochester. And then we offer the same public health follow-up for anybody who has an elevated level. And we do continue to find products. We're able to remove those from the home, talk with the families about what they are and why they may be harmful. And that all happens through our partners, of course. But these are really important because they offer the chance to integrate this information into the healthcare practice, which is something that may come up today and which I think is very important and is an area that needs a lot more work. We've also just recently launched a new statewide program called Healthy Kids Minnesota. And this is focusing on environmental health and preschool aged kids around the state. And we'll be measuring urine mercury in this group along with many other chemicals, really hoping that we don't find these elevated cases in the younger kids, but we wanted to include this as something we could look at and provide families with this information. We're also looking for ways to get better data on this issue. I mean, as you can probably hear from my presentation, we don't have great data on use, on health effects. One example is that in Minnesota, having an elevated urine mercury test, for example, is not reportable to the state, unlike in other states that is reportable. That's one example. And then lastly, and I think most importantly, these key pillars of testing products and getting the products out of businesses that might be selling them, and then community engagement are also critical to the whole effort. My last slide, to segue into some of the other discussion, is just to really stress that advocacy is having an impact in this area in some really exciting ways. Amira Adawe, probably many folks on the call know Amira, but she's a longtime advocate on this topic in Minnesota and globally. And she advocated for state legislation to fund an outreach and education campaign, which passed. So these were one-time funds to our agency. There were 4 grantees that have been doing some really exciting work in our state that these have just wrapped up. I think some folks from those organizations are here today as well. But there are many other examples of the impact that Amira's work and that other efforts are having. So I hope this will just continue. And with that, I thank you. Looks like we're right about at time, but I will look at the chat and continue to address any questions that come through the chat. I'd be really glad to follow up with anybody who has questions or thoughts for us about our work as well. Thank you for the time, and I really look forward to the rest of the day.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. Hi, everyone. I am Gao Lor, a senior public health major at Hamline University and a student coordinator for the Center for Justice and Law. I am excited to be introducing our keynote speaker, Kavitha Emmanuel. She is an inspiring activist from Southern India. She is the founder of the Dark is Beautiful campaign. This campaign speaks against racial discrimination and encourages everyone to embrace their skin color. Dark is Beautiful helps to advocate for those that do not have a voice in their own culture, society, and work. Kavitha Emmanuel advocates for vulnerable communities that struggle in these areas, which helps them to see that they have value and their health is important. I truly admire her passion and the work that she has done in trying to address that validation and worth shouldn't be based on skin color. And although it began in India, it became known in many other countries, which is super important because it's a global issue. And so we are honored to have Kavitha Emmanuel with us today. Welcome, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Lor. Thank you so much. I hope you were able to hear me. It's sort of late in India. It's about 10 p.m., but I'm really honored to be speaking with you today. And yes, I'm going to be talking about colorism, primarily in the Asian context. I will be sharing more with you about the Dark is Beautiful campaign at the end of my talk to give you more information about it. But really, it's really exciting to be part of this conference, and thanks to Center for Justice and Law of Hamline University for having me here and talking to you about our experiences here in India and how colorism is. When we initiated the campaign, we hardly had any idea at that point in time that this is such a huge global issue. And yes, this is an important subject, no doubt a need of the hour. In some ways, I feel it is rather unfortunate that we are just waking up to the issue sort of late, but I'm thrilled that we're here and we're trying to elevate global awareness on colorism, along with hopefully seek solutions to end it as well. I would like to title my keynote today as Mercury Rising to End Colorism. And of course, the pun is intended. When we initiated the Dark is Beautiful campaign in 2009 here in India, people in my context here were rarely aware of the word colorism. The very word colorism or shadism was very new to us. And yet we have always seen countless individuals whose self-worth was shattered or were denied opportunities and made to feel like they're second-class citizens solely based on their skin color. And the words, in my talk, you will see that the words fair and white or light will be used interchangeably because that's what, and that's how it is referred to here in most South Asian contexts. Fair skin is white skin, which is synonymous with beautiful skin. One of the successes the campaign has had since its launch is the cascading effect it has had over the years in bringing awareness to the issue of colorism on varied platforms. The issue has been highlighted in schools, universities, spotlighted by the media, sung by musicians, taken up by writers, bloggers, photographers, some filmmakers, and other forums like this conference we are having here today. To know that the awareness is spreading and that we are being woken up to the importance of addressing colorism is certainly something to be celebrated. The beauty industry, on the other hand, has also been forced to wake up because they're being held accountable for endorsing an age-old toxic belief that a person's worth can be measured by the color of their skin. In one sense, we have seen progress because now brands realize that people are able to see through their life. Consumers are beginning to read labels and disbelieve and filter advertisements, and that is good news indeed. And we would agree that how some brands have done, and you might have heard about this, by merely changing the word of a product from fair to glow or bright, brands cannot claim that they have done their bit to end colorism. We certainly want more than that. We want more authentic change than merely whitewashed lies, and an attempt to repackage the product with verbiage that is in fact close to no change at all. A sense of justice, which is unfair, pervades the whitening products industry. I want to bring to our notice today that the matter of concern here is really twofold. On one hand is what we are talking about here, very specifically, what goes into the making of whitening products, its harmful chemicals, its mercury content. Those are important to discuss, and we need to set those things right. If the skin lightening industry is tampering with our health and well-being, then they need to be pulled up for it. But the matter doesn't end there. Colorism does not just affect our physical well-being, but is also of concern with regard to our mental health. We need to be careful to pay attention to the highly poisoned mental attitudes as well that have birthed insecurities in the non-white and unfair population of the world. And we are being preyed upon by the cosmetic brands even today. At the onset of the campaign, some of the cosmetic brands and advertising agencies responded to our messages, our prodding, by saying that we're here to give people what they want. We will stop when they stop wanting it. In fact, one of the brand owners whom we challenged said that we are actually not responsible for what people believe or how people are affected by what we sell. We are a business. We are not responsible, for instance, for what children see on their television screens. They need to choose what they want. Their parents need to tell them what they can see. And he said, in fact, the whole world is after whitening. Why are you asking me to stop? So the question is, should businesses be fair? Do they have a responsibility to stop colorism? Of course they do. Ending colorism is not just up to the consumers, the nonprofits, social activists, researchers, governments, and educators. Businesses need to have a conscience too. One of the ads we filed a petition against in India had the tagline, which roughly translates to, you need more fairness in life. You need more fair in life. And yes, we need more fairness in the real sense of the term. We want the beauty industry to step up their claims with authentic change and represent the equality of skin shades in all their platforms, in their advertising, and wherever they talk about, grooming or empowering, women through their products. We know for a fact that the same brands that promote, talks and presentations on self-worth are also on the other side selling whitening products. And the fact of the matter is, we actually want more than representation. We want brands to move from mere tokenism in their advertising to the celebration of all skin tones. Now, why is that important? For me and for us who are from Team Dark is Beautiful, the fight against colorism started just over a decade ago over coffee table discussions. We were just talking about real life experiences of women, and sometimes very often children and young adults who have been victims of discrimination in India. The stories we spoke about included how some were victims of discrimination from the time of their birth, bullied and denied opportunities because of the color of their skin. Children being compared with their lighter skinned siblings and made to feel less valuable. Women humiliated in their dating experiences or facing rejection in marriage proposal ceremonies. Children facing bullying in school for their dark skin, or told by parents not to go out and play in the sun or participate in sports because if they went out, they would get darker. Worse still, children not being chosen to be part of school performances if they are dark skinned. On the surface, it all looks like a very simple problem that can be easily fixed. And many have said to me, colorism is just a superficial issue. Why don't you spend your energy and time on those graver issues like poverty and unemployment? But what people don't see is that we have created this vicious cycle, a toxic disposition, a deep-rooted cultural nuance that has created this damaging mindset that we are often unaware of, the mindset that justifies unfair behavior and practices towards those with dark skin tones. We forget that the people we're talking about who are probably poor and unsuccessful because of their skin color, and this skin color has kept them from the opportunities that is due to them. We forget that their damaged self-worth has kept them from realizing their full potential. The law in most parts of the world has tended to overlook this sense of innate injustice, at least in the South Asian context. We need more legislation to protect people from skin color discrimination. Our brains are wired to feel normal when we discriminate. We're so blinded by it that we're so blinded by the sense of justice, which is unfair, really. We have kind of normalized it and we believe a lie. More than half the population in the world today is non-white. But what we see represented and celebrated often is just 1/10 of the world's population who fit the stereotype definition of what is beautiful or successful or of noteworthy class. We have made wanting to be white or fair a legitimate aspiration. I have been part of interviews where people say, if it is an aspirational thing, wanting to be whiter, and so what's wrong in using a whitening product? One of the recent articles by CNN, or maybe some of you have read it, it reveals the extent to which the toxicity of colorism can affect us. The article is about topical steroid damage dependent, or that topical steroid dependent phase, which is caused by the excessive and prolonged use of steroid creams. The obsession to look whiter can become an addiction. But apart from topical addiction, colorism has the toxic potential to go through your skin to affect your mind as well. It has also become, to many of us, a mental addiction. That is why it is high time we looked beyond those lies and be able to see the billion shades of skin as the norm, because that is the real normal, the world with a billion shades of beautiful. So we need to see actors, journalists, musicians, models, teachers, reporters, novelists, politicians in different shades of skin. We, the people of the world, need to learn to represent the way the world actually looks in a billion shades of skin. All of us in India, for instance, don't look like Bollywood actors. Sharon Muthu, one of our ambassadors, a voiceover artist and an actor in Hollywood of Indian origin, says that sometimes she was made to feel that she does not look Indian enough for some of the roles she auditioned for in Hollywood. Nina Davaluri, who won the American Miss America crown, was not beautiful enough to the Indians back home to have won it because of her skin color. We have numerous examples such as these to give us the jolt we need to remind us that there is something wrong with the way we perceive people and people groups. Colorism is such a unique issue. I don't have to say that because we're all aware of it. We are dealing with it on a daily basis. It is both intra and interracial. It intersects with racism and other forms of discrimination connected to people's ethnic origins. It is also both intra and intercultural. It intersects with social hierarchical discriminatory practices. For example, we have what we have as the caste as part of how we relate with one another, which is of course legally banned today in India, but the mindset still remains in many places. Class anywhere in the world is definitely related to skin color for the most part. Colorism is also an issue that intersects with gender. For example, women face the brunt of it in most parts of the world because of societal expectations of what a woman should look like. The notion of beauty is attached to who a woman is. Her identity is wrapped up in that box of stereotype definition of beauty, in which fair, white, or whiter is a prerequisite. So whenever we are led to think that colorism is not a serious issue, we need to remind ourselves that colorism could be playing a role in how dark-skinned people are associated with some of these descriptions of being poor or being of lower class or less worth and status in society. In Indian movies, it is very common to notice the villain or the criminal to be dark-skinned, whereas the hero or the protagonist is usually fair-skinned. Why is there a hierarchy of skin shades attached to one's status or even value in society? Why is there a skin color gradient in our perception of who is beautiful, wealthy, rich, educated, or of high standing in society? These are questions we need to keep probing and trying to answer. And as a brown person, this is something that I need to say to you. Brown people think they're better than the black. As brown people, we think that being whiter is better than being brown. And so this is how we behave. We treat the white better. And the closer your shade of brown is to white, the better you are. And we keep aspiring to look whiter. I have to own up to the fact that the Black people aren't treated right in most Asian contexts as well, including mine, because of the inherent bias. And that is one reason I had a problem when I saw some of us Asians reacting to the incidents that happened in the US in the last couple of years. It is not that we as Asians cannot stand up for justice and support movements like the Black Lives Matter, but I wish in the same breath we would also clean our own closets and our backyards of the biases we hold dear. Mazarin Banaji, an experimental psychologist, in her talk, Blind Spot, Hidden Biases of Good People, talks about how the brain contains the thumbprint of culture. I remember in one of our workshops when we were bringing awareness to a group of children in an orphanage, we gave them sheets to color with pictures of people's faces on it. And I couldn't help but notice that this one boy who was hardly 10 years old, he refused to change his idea that skin color could be different shades of brown and not necessarily peach. And my efforts to convince him to do his own shade of brown were futile because he's so used to thinking that skin has to be peach. The impression we had created in his young mind was to be peach colored is normal and being brown is abnormal. But in spite of these depressing instances, we also have good stories to celebrate. In one of our workshops, I remember a young student, a teenager, who went up to the microphone after our awareness program, and she publicly apologized for the way she nicknamed and bullied those of her classmates who were darker than her. Colorism can end, as difficult as it sounds, it can end. But the question really is, are we willing to pay the price for change? Change can be highly disturbing, challenging, and inconvenient. It will cost you and I to bring awareness. It will cost businesses dearly to stop endorsing discrimination through their products. And because of the nature of colorism, we cannot simply solve it by pointing our fingers at others and saying, you need to change, you need to stop that. I, for one, believe that we have to see ourselves in the middle of the problem, because unconsciously, because of the fact we have internalized the bias and normalized it, we could be endorsing it ourselves in many ways. So the matter here is to kind of ask ourselves as well those hard questions while we're trying to address change externally. So if we are willing to challenge ourselves and step towards change, there is hope, right? It is not just about pointing our fingers and saying, if they stop, then there will be change. The answer is, if we all stop, then there will be change. We can end colorism. At the Dark is Beautiful campaign, we are very clear that we don't want our campaign to be a hate instigator. I'm approached by media very often with the question, who started colorism? But a better question would be to ask, who is keeping it alive? It could be you and it could be me. And yes, of course, it's the whitening product industry, the beauty industry. It is good for us to take a look back at history, but let's look back to learn. Let's look back so that we don't repeat its mistakes. The idea of awareness is to bring change and not to spread hate. It is not to reverse the bias onto another skin shade. It is about inclusion. Change needs to be positive, inclusive, and authentic. It's a Mercury rising moment for all of us. Let's end colorism together. Just give me a couple of minutes to share with you a few slides about the Dark is Beautiful campaign so that you can be in touch with me too. I hope you can see my slides. Okay. The Dark is Beautiful campaign was initiated in 2009, and yes, it is a campaign initiated by this non-profit program called Women of Worth in India. It is an awareness and advocacy campaign, and anyone and everyone is welcome to participate and be part of it. It was initiated in India, launched by the toxic belief that a person's worth is measured by the color of their skin. It draws attention to the unjust effects of skin color bias shaped by societal attitudes and reinforced by media messages that are corroding the self-worth of people. We bring awareness through various initiatives, through workshops, through advocacy, and social media events, and this is an interesting event, milestone that I should mention. In 2004, our team met and challenged Imami, which is a local product brand, to take down the discriminatory ad called Handsome, which of course was a product promoted and marketed for men. And for a long time, we only had products that were meant for women, and then there was Fair and Handsome. And this particular ad also supported one of our leading Bollywood actors. And that is exactly what I mentioned. It basically talks about you need more of life, you need more fair in life. And so after this petition, we had about 30,000 signatures, and we went and met the advertising agency and the brand owners, and several other events that happened. But eventually, for the first time, the Advertising Standards Council of India implemented new guidelines for advertisers promoting whitening products. So these are our social media handles. Feel free to stay in touch and participate in our discussions. We have a short ad for you from the Darkest Beautiful campaign. I request Susi Keefe to play that for us. Thank you so much.
Kavitha, I think we do have a minute or two for questions, and I posted them in the chat for you if you wanted to answer them.
Okay, let me just look at it. How is India faring with women changing their thinking on this? Thinking. Oops. Could you read the question for me? This. What role does colors? Yes, there are several reasons. This is a loaded question. So I'm just trying to get just that question.
Do you want me to read it to you?
Yeah, could you please do that?
Sure. How is India faring with women changing their thinking on this topic? For example, mothers wanting fair skins, daughters-in-law, men wanting fair wife, and so on. What role does the past play in the current thinking? For example, India's occupation by the British.
I mean, it's obvious that the colonial rule has left its residue back in India, and yes, we have that attitude, right? We do still, for the most part, believe that white is beautiful, and so people, I would say, the awareness is increasing, but the issue of colorism is still huge. As we already know, we are fighting $1 billion industry. And today we're talking about it a lot. We are seeing a lot more people being aware and being made aware and starting their own campaigns. And yes, it is growing. The awareness is growing, but India is such a huge country. And I would say we have hardly sort of merely scratched the surface of bringing awareness. More needs to happen. And if you ask me today, where is the bias? The level of bias, it is still huge. It is still huge. Unfortunately, it's still huge. But I have hope with the upcoming generation that they will stand against colorism and they will change the attitude towards dark skin tones.
Thank you. There is one more, and I will say to our audience, we do have time for more questions. So if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we'll read it to Kavitha. So the second question is, I'm curious if Unilever's rebrand of their Fair and Lovely product to Glow and Lovely has seen any substantial positive results. Seems more performative, but would love to get your feedback.
Yeah, my personal opinion is that this has been no change at all, because for us who are aware that there is this deep-seated bias in our culture, this just merely kind of changing a word hasn't changed anything. And for the the others who are still not aware that, an issue like colorism exists, this shift has made no difference. In fact, if you see the ad today, there's hardly any difference. Fair and Lovely to Glow and Lovely, you just cannot make out what is different about the new ad. So to me, it is not made much of a difference at all. And the other thing I want to add is that Fair and Lovely as a brand has also been associated with a women's empowerment program. They run a women's empowerment program. They've been running it for the last 30 or 20 years or something like that. And to me, kind of, they're both contradictory. On one side, you're saying Fair and Lovely, this is how you should look as a woman. On the other side, you're saying you are a woman, you can do anything that you want to be who you want to be. And so for me, the brand really has to kind of take a more authentic stand and say that, yeah, we have been endorsing this in the past, but now we want to make a change, and things can be different. So I would say there's hardly been any change.
Thank you. I don't see any additional questions. I'm going to just ask one last time if anybody has a question before we let Kavitha go. We're so grateful that you're here and staying up late tonight to join us. I think that's all. Thank you again so much for being with us. We are grateful for all that you've shared with us, and we will be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Kavitha, for that amazing keynote. My name is Tsion Tulu. I am the fellow and program coordinator for the CJL this year. And I want to just first and foremost thank Kavitha for that amazing keynote, and how much that helped illustrate how skin lightening and colorism are deeply rooted and impactful issues that affect immigrant and refugee communities all over the world. Today, I have the opportunity of introducing and moderating our first panel, which is titled Community Conversations on Colorism, which brings together Hamline alumni who hold immigrant and refugee titles to discuss one of the root causes of skin lightening and one of the things that were highlighted in Kavitha's keynote, colorism. In doing this, we want to acknowledge how necessary it is to have people who are impacted by the topics we discuss not only be part of the discussion, but invite them to lead these conversations as experts in their own right. I'm very excited to hold space with these panelists. And so with that, I'll allow our panelists to introduce themselves and speak a little bit about yourselves.
Hi, my name is Nadia. I graduated from Hamline in 2018. I studied public health with a minor in social justice. Currently, I work at Family Tree Clinic as a community engagement liaison, holding a grant from MDH on eliminating health disparities among Black, African American, African immigrants, refugee population, deaf, blind, hard of hearing, and the queer community. That work is really important to me, and I'm really
Thank you, Nadia. I'll pass it off to Abdullahi.
Hello, my name is Abdullahi Abdulle. I am also a Hamline graduate. I graduated in May of 2018 with majoring in public health and psychology. In regards to kind of my experience with like skin lightening creams, along with Micheal and Nadia, we did a senior seminar with the Minnesota Department of Health in understanding perceptions of amongst college students with skin lightening products. After graduating, I did a year stint in Peace Corps, and now I am I'm in grad school right now at George Washington in getting my master's in public health. So.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I'll pass it off to Micheal next.
Morning, everyone. I'm glad to see some familiar faces, Nadia and Abdulle as well. Yeah, my name is Michael Xiong. I work for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Obviously, my work here at Hamline University kind of kicked off my career here. So that's kind of what led me here. And I've kind of continued the work and that our class has done with the skin lightening products. And, I've gotten even more work. So I've worked with Jessica Nelson, the BDO project, and a couple of the members here that will have panels. So I'm glad to be here and I'm glad to continue the work. And I'm glad that we're charging on.
Thanks so much, Michael. And our last panelist, Yasmin, you can introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Yasmin. I graduated from Hamline University in May of 2021. I studied political science and global studies with a minor in philosophy and attained a teaching English as a foreign language certificate. I am coming on to this panel as a community member and somebody who is just knows what it's like to experience colorism, racism, and like a culture that is rooted in a lot of these problems that we are talking about today. And I'm just excited to be a part of this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. We're excited to have you. So thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to open up the discussion by asking you guys to tell us just a bit about your experiences with skin lightening and colorism, since that is the topic, and what brings you to this panel today. And you guys can popcorn to each other.
Yeah, I guess I could go first. The first time I experienced colorism when I was in the 6th grade, so I was about 12 years old. I've never experienced colorism, didn't know that was such a thing until we were going to Valley Fair for a school field trip back then. When everyone went on field trips for school, we went to Valley Fair. There's other schools there, and I was with some friends, and I see 2 girls kind of walk kind of beside me. One of the girls go, "Oh, what about him? He's cute," and the other girl go, "Yeah, he's cute, but he's kind of dark." And so that was like the first time I was like, "Wow, no one never said I was kind of dark." And so that was the first time I've experienced any kind of colorism. And it did kind of change my perception in a way where I was like, wow, I am kind of dark. Maybe I should probably scrub my face a little harder when I wash my face, or scrub my skin a little harder. Maybe I should use more soap. This was obviously before the knowledge of skin lightening creams and all that stuff. So they didn't quite have that back when I was 12, but it was just like a thing going, my goodness, I've never had that feeling before where I was downgraded. And it wasn't like a different person of color. It was, I can tell they were Hmong as well, because I am Hmong. So then they said that to me, and I was like, wow, I've never heard that before. So that was the first time I experienced it, and it really impacted me for quite a few years. So I've always been a little bit more cautious. I stopped going outside a lot, just to stop the perception of getting all the sun coming in. So for a while, I lived in fear. So I stopped playing soccer, just because, playing soccer, you're outdoors a lot and you're going to get a little darker. So then, yeah, that really impacted me in quite a harmful way.
Thank you for sharing that, Michael. And we can go to the next panelist. We can popcorn around.
Yeah, I can share. In regards to, I guess, like my first experience with skin lightening or colorism in general, when I was in middle school and junior high, I actually got the opportunity to study abroad and live in India for a couple of years. And that was actually the first time that I've kind of experienced colorism in a major way. I think living in the United States, I experienced racism, but I didn't really understand what colorism is and kind of like that discrimination based on skin tone. So when I was living in India, I was going to an all Indian school, but there was like specific discrimination in regards to other Indians with how fair the skin was. There were, people might not want to sit with each other at lunch, or just not want to hang out with another person based on how light or fair their skin may or may not be. And that had to do also with like the caste system in India and different social constructs within India as well. So that kind of opened my eyes. in a way that, you know, there isn't just racism, but there's also colorism within that as well.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking about the earliest memory I have in terms of like seeing ads and like just talking a little bit more about skin lightening products. And Kavitha was talking about Bollywood, and like when I was growing up in Kenya, that's a lot of like the shows and movies that I watched was like Bollywood movies. And from Bollywood, and like in between the acts and like the movies that we're watching, the commercials would all be like skin lightening products. And like I never really understood what any of it really was. And like just thinking retrospectively, like I was at 6 years old at that time, and that's the first experience that I have of seeing products that like are tailored to making your skin lighter so that you look more beautiful. And I remember like looking back on all the movies that I would watch, it was always light skinned people, and it's never dark skin that are represented. And if they are, like Kavitha said, that they would be the bad people in the story, or the villains, or the people that need to be resolved in the story. So that's the earliest memory that I have. And then just thinking about my own personal experiences, growing up in a Somali household, like as if you've met Somali people, we come in all shades and like different, you know, various tones. And within each family, there's like a light skin, there's a dark skin, there's a medium skin tone kid. And like, you can see the way that each and every person is treated based on their skin, not only by family members, but by the community and society. You're encouraged to stay inside if you're dark because you don't want to get too dark in the sun during the summer. If you are somebody that's like lighter skin, you're praised more, you're looked at differently, you're given a lot of attention, you're uplifted a little bit more than the darker skin colored kid. And so that's also like some personal things that I've experienced within my own community, and like seeing people with different households that have different shades of kids, like the way that certain kids are given better treatment than the other ones that are darker. So that's like the earliest and like the more personal experience that I have with colorism.
I thinking back to like my childhood and like the first time experienced colorism would probably be like just like weird little comments that you receive from like aunts and like aunties or like random family members who just be like, oh, like you've spent so much time outside, like you've gotten so dark. And I, for one, really like to roller skate and bike. So I was outside for hours on like at a time during the summer. So I think that was my first kind of like experience with colorism. Not that I really knew what it was at the time. And in hindsight, I think it just kind of perpetuates this idea of like kind of like ruining self-esteem in young girls within the Somali community, and just really shows the way that like socialization and like the idea of being fair and polite is so important. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of your experiences. I think a lot of you have touched on this already, and tied how your experiences are reflected in your role as, or your identity as an immigrant and refugee holding person. And so I wanted to ask, how does your identity as an immigrant or refugee like person impact your perception of colorism and skin lightening? And how do you bring that into your work as well?
So in regards to like the impact of my like my refugee or like my immigrant status, I'd say with that would be you kind of do notice that moving from, I guess, like one continent or one country to the United States or a Western country, you can see that whiteness is almost like the global beauty standard. So you kind of see it in all the media, in all kind of the studies that we were able to do in our senior seminar, and all the research that we were able to do. We saw that Studies show that people with, lighter complexions earn more on average compared to people with darker skin tones. We did see that people had higher like social status within their community as well. So all those things are kind of things that were at the back of my mind when thinking of colorism or skin lightening, or kind of understanding why people do the things that they might do. So I just think that kind of breaking that narrative of just like whiteness or Eurocentric beauty standards is the only thing that really is beautiful would definitely help in breaking kind of the stigma of colorism, you could say.
Yeah, I could go next. Obviously being Hmong, I was born in America, so I'm a first generation Hmong American. So I didn't have to travel across land or sea just to be in America. So I was born here, but my parents were refugees. And even in our studies with Nadia and Abdulle, we've noticed that there is a big division in terms of people who are refugees, because we still have younger generations of Hmong people who are refugees or they came from Thailand or Laos. And then there's a differentiation between the people who are born in America. So they become more Americanized. So there's two different standards of beauty that exist in the Hmong community just from being a difference there. And so we've noticed that happened. So being a person of color and being Hmong, I'm able to understand this and I'm able to incorporate this in my job and say, hey, there is a difference here. So it's not all, black and white. And I mean it in terms of like different lines. So it's not, hey, it's just one side or the other. No, there's a lot of different layers. There's a lot of different dynamics. And I know that exists in other communities of colors as well. So it isn't just as easy an answer as like yes, no. So there's multiple layers. So just understanding that concept has really helped me bring it to my agency, and they've been able to greatly understand it with their environmental justice team, who just so happened to used to sit across the wall from me, and so I'm able to convey with them and their whenever they need something. Hey, Mike, how does this work in the Hmong community? Can we relay this? And they could just reach over the wall and converse with me, and I'm able to get my point across. Especially working at a State Department that is probably the least diverse of all the departments in Minnesota. I think we have less than maybe 70 people of color out of 1,000, close to 1,000 staff members spread across the state. So it's very low, and that's including people who are probably in IT as well. And so I am only one of maybe 5 Hmong people at my agency, and I'm on the professional side, so that's probably even like 1 of 3 maybe. And so it's very different, and it's great that I'm able to use my background and explain it and help the agency and help my profession in multiple layers. And I think that's something that we do need more in terms of state agencies and other different corporations, is that we shouldn't be afraid to bring our background into it. People want to hear our diversity. People want to hear our ideas. They want to hear what our knowledge is and how can we communicate with the Somali population, the Ethiopian population. How do we commute with African Americans? How do we commute with Hmongs, Chinese, or whoever it might be? A lot of agencies are looking, or a lot of organizations are looking for these kind of people. So don't be afraid to use that to your advantage. Is another thing I would like to suggest.
Going off of Michael, I want to say that really working in a professional setting in Minnesota requires a lot of really engaging, especially if you're a person of color, engaging with people that don't necessarily understand, sometimes don't want to understand, but like really have no conceptual knowledge of what it means to be a person of color, and how to serve the communities that are in Minnesota, because Minnesota is a really diverse area. And like Michael said, and I work in the nonprofit sector, and I'm the only Somali person and one of 6 Black people that work in the nonprofit, and the communities that we serve in South Minneapolis is really really diverse and really house like low income people of color. And so really what I've learned in our class, in our senior seminar class, is understanding ways in which like the structures of the structures of colorism, the structures of inequities really are multifaceted and can affect people in different ways, whether it be you trying to access healthcare, trying to access transportation, food, food security. So all of these things have brought me to the work that I do. And I think I want to end by saying that really thinking and reflecting on your own identities is really important when you want to help communities, especially communities of color, and sharing your ideas, and really just making sure that you have you understand what your role is with your identity is really important too.
Yeah, I really do appreciate that, Nadia. I think I share very similar experiences working in a nonprofit, not seeing a lot of representation, being the only Somali / like African person here in this space, and having to bridge those gaps because the large population in the area that I work at is like predominantly East African folks, predominantly Hmong folks, and there's just not a lot of like representation within the law firm that I'm at. But for me, on a personal level, like I just think about this type of work and just like on like different like scales. So on a larger scale, I think about the way that like it's important to tackle these issues, and the root of it is really like white supremacy, and making sure that like we're constantly working to have principles that are anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, and making sure that folks are recognizing the impact that white supremacy has in a lot of work that we do, and the way that we interact with people in the communities that we serve. On a more like work level, professional level, for me, it means like just representing my people and like making sure that there's opportunity to learn from one another and to like connect with community members that you are meant to serve, not just saying that you work for these communities, but working alongside with them and actually hearing what they have to say and what they're experiencing. You can't say you're an organization of and for the people without representation and like actual people from the community at the table making those decisions for themselves. And on a more like individual level, for me, it means showing up authentically in spaces. I think a lot of times like Black women specifically are expected to be happy, chirpy, like super nice, super outgoing, like always friendly, always expected to be on like top tier level, just like basically just having to like be non-human in a lot of spaces and like not being validated for feeling emotions and being human and being seen as somebody who's real. And so I just keep it 100% with people. I don't try to be somebody that I'm not. If I'm not into something, I'm not into it. If I'm not feeling something, I'm not feeling it. Like I'm not going to be somebody that I'm not, to make other people, specifically white people, comfortable. And other people who don't know what it's like to be a Black woman and walking around in a lot of these spaces and navigating a very white-centered, white-centric, like Eurocentric society. And so I think for me, it just means showing up authentically and like not being, you know, pushed to be like this happy, chirpy person. And it doesn't matter how people are going to perceive it. I really like think it's up to them. But for the most part, I've just experienced in a lot of professional spaces that like I'm expected to be 100% all the time, like and that's just not ideal and it's not real. And so those are like the different levels that I think about this type of work and bringing that type of energy to the workspaces that I'm in, the people that I'm in community with, the friends that I have, the family members that I care about and love. And I just want to pursue that on a more real and like rooted way that like is grounded and is just meant to serve the greater good. So that's my answer, I guess, to that question.
Thank you so much. I definitely agree. And I can understand, I think, especially with what Nadia and Yasmin were saying about towing the balance between showing up authentically as yourself and using your identities to help serve, and then being exploited or being, as Micheal said, being one of the only people in your positions, and then ending up, you know, overexploiting yourself and leaning into other things. And with that, there are some questions in the chat about how would you navigate these experiences, and what do you want employers or people who in the audience who may be in circumstances like this to know about the experience? I feel like you guys touched on it a bit, but just to zero in a little bit more about that. And any of you can go ahead.
So I think a lot of the feelings that I have around the, like colorism and just like racism in general is just the fact that like people with darker skin are just seen to be devalued in a lot of places. They're seen as less than, they're seen as disposable for a lot of times for folks. I remember when I first learned about like mercury poisoning, it was in Professor Keefe's class, Intro to Public Health, and just thinking about how like people are willing to like hurt themselves and possibly their children in order to be closer to whiteness, because whiteness has a lot of power. There's a lot of room and ability to move through this world. And so I just thought about how like people in our culture and our society are willing to like, and when I talk about my culture, I'm talking about Somali people are willing to like hurt themselves in the process of like just being accepted, and like that's just not okay. I think about how like folks could do a better job of understanding the struggles and like uplifting folks that are like of darker skin and like specifically people of color who are not just like seen as exotic or like, you know, like light skin or closer to whiteness, but really have real tangible experiences that like matter and like actually bring to the table like experiences that like could uplift different issues. So I just, yeah, I was just thinking about how like when I first learned about this, it just made me think critically about, okay, why is it that people are willing to do this thing that could possibly hurt them? And also thinking about ways to educate people about this. I think a lot of people don't necessarily have the information or the understanding that like this could lead to greater problems rather than just like skin lightening, but really like more like health problems that could impact the children of the household and like the people that they're around. And so one, empowering folks to feel more comfortable, and people in this space or other spaces being aware that like you don't just uplift exotic like light-skinned people, but like people of all different shades that matter, but also educating and like having access to information that can empower people to recognize that this is not good for them.
And I just want to touch on and add to what Yasmin said, but in a different context, is like, I think a lot of times when we talk about colorism to people, they tend to think, oh, it's just people, a BIPOC community issue. It's not always a BIPOC community issue. You know, this is something that happens in white society as well. You know, historically, if you think about it, the term blue blood, what does the term blue blood mean? It means royalty. We think of it, oh, royalty or someone noble. And that actually stemmed from being pale skin, that your veins turn blue, that you can see the blueness in your veins. And that was a white society issue that happened back in European days. But that's kind of changed in the West now, where the trend is if you've gone tanning, or if you went to some island to go to the beach somewhere and you've got a nice tan, people are like, oh yeah, they've got money. Where did they go? Oh, they went to Aruba, or they went to somewhere exotic, and they're like, oh yeah, they've got money. So it seemed kind of like, oh, they've got a kind of a money thing. So I just want to also add that it's not just a BIPOC community. It's every race has this colorism issue. So it's not just, oh, Black folks, Asian folks, or Latinx folks. It's everybody, and it impacts us all. And I've had a woman who had used skin lightening cream, and she was Caucasian. But her reason was different versus everyone else, is that she had a medical condition that caused her skin to be differentiated in color. And she wanted to use the skin lightening creams because she wanted to blend her skin together to be white, because she didn't want discoloration. So that's very similar to what a lot of people in our community are using skin lightening for, is that, hey, I've got a discoloration, I want to use it. How do I touch that up? And so she was using that because, hey, I've got a discoloration. She looked up online, oh, skin lightening cream, I could buy that online. And she was Caucasian. So it's not just BIPOC community. And I just always want to make an emphasis that, hey, this affects all of us and not just people of color.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that in regards to talking about colorism or racism in kind of the professional workspaces. Some things that I guess would not have to, some things that would need to be done is kind of creating safe spaces for difficult conversations. So especially when you might be the only person of color in the office, that can be very isolating and can make you a little bit more vulnerable to racism or colorism. So it's on the organizational leaders or HR professionals to kind of help advocate for you to being able to create safe spaces for these difficult conversations, and maybe leveling the playing field. And like Micheal was saying, there's only 70 out of the 1,000 employees at the Department of Health are only people of color. So kind of leveling the playing field and getting a little bit more diverse would only create even more safer spaces for having those difficult conversations, and having more people be represent the communities that they're from, so that we can kind of tackle the issues that they are facing, because the people that can really help eliminate the issues or know the issues the best are the people from those specific communities at the end of the day.
Okay, so I really like the discussion that's going on so far, and I completely agree that colorism and racism and all of these different systems that are impacting all of us are not just our problem, and we shouldn't be the only people at the forefront making that change, but obviously centered as people with their experiences and everything else, and the places and systems that we work in, having safe spaces for us to navigate it better. But going off of that, I kind of want to talk a little bit more about how the larger systems that impact and shape your views on colorism that you guys have mentioned, such as racism and colonialism, how that might be tied into skin lightening for you, or how you view that happening.
So I do believe that obviously colorism, racism, and colonialism all play a major part in skin lightening. So like, where does this idea of like wanting to be lighter skinned come from? And that's really thinking about these European beauty standards, and how over time that was what was beautiful, like that was being fair. And so these systems are systems of oppression, and I really think that time, they've evolved as people evolve, and I think including in like advertising and how the advertising organizations work to spread these messages and like reinforce these ideas, and how that trickles down into people's like ideologies and cultures, over time and how that affects youth. And so all of these things I think are really big and really structural. And I do think awareness, understanding, and education, but also the part of education that I want to highlight is making sure that it's cultural specific. Because obviously every culture is different and every culture has a different relationship to the idea of whiteness. So yeah, that's what I want to say.
I guess I could go next. So colorism and skin lightening does affect my job 100%. So what I do at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is that most of my work revolves around skin lightening products. It is illegal to sell skin lightening products in Minnesota, mainly because of the mercury content that's in the products itself. And so we do a lot of regulations in terms of enforcement. So we want people to not sell these. So I've been having to reach out to vendors. I've reached out to organizations to talk about them strategies to say, hey, how can we curb the demand with colorism? And a lot of times it's young women or women of bearing age who are using these products, as well as their moms or their daughters as well. And so it's been a difficult task to try to change the perception of beauty because for a lot of these folks, men and women, it's a marriage or social status issue that they are worried about from their communities. And so how do we fight that? It's been really hard. And so we've got people like Kavitha and Emmanuel trying to promote dark is beautiful, as well as the Fair and Lovely ads have been reeling out. It's been difficult, but at the same time, I'm working with vendors to try to reduce their claims, to reduce the sales or to not sell them at all. But it's been hard because people always go, what are my alternatives? If this is dangerous, can I use something else? And that's been really hard to just tell them, say, don't use anything at all, because they all want to get beautiful in whatever perceivable way that they seem fit. So it's been a tough challenge, but it's also been a great opportunity to work with people of different areas as well, different vendors from different backgrounds. So it's been great to understand and have knowledge, because sometimes we don't reach across the aisle as much as we think we do. But just reaching across the aisle to say, hey, tell me more. How does this work in the Somali community? Or how does this work in the African American community? Tell me more in the Native American community. How do I work this? Or how do I get my message across? And it kind of helps that I am a person of color. So there is some trust there versus me being a Caucasian person coming in. What was the term that I was using the other day? Gun ho on people that just tell them, hey, you have to do this. And sometimes people are very to kind of push back, when you command them to do things. And this has really helped me in my professional career, is that, hey, bringing this aspect, working along the skin lightening creams, knowing that they are legal, working with vendors to dispose of them as well. So I've been working with hazardous waste communities, VSQGs, which is very small quantity generators, to dispose of the products as well. Because sometimes we think if we get them off the vendor shelves, they're good, but they can be filled up in somewhere in a landfill in a third world country where it's probably illuminating mercury vapors and endangering other people's lives. And a lot of times those third world countries are very, are places of color. Like could be in Africa, could be in Asia, could be somewhere remote where there is a small child somewhere who is endangered to the mercury vapors, just because someone's like, oh, I'm trying to do the right thing and I'll toss it in the trash. There's other ways that we could recycle as well. So those are one other avenue that we do try to promote as well here at the Pollution Control Agency. Say, hey, we can get them off the shelves, but where do they go? And that's been a challenge that we can do, but the challenge is to stop the sellers and all the perception of colorism, that the demand, because if the demand's there, this is a $20 billion industry. How do we fight that? And it's been hard, but not giving up hope, because if the European society can change from blue blood veins to tanning, I guess we can go the other way as well, or dark is beautiful. And I just want to thank Dr. Kavitha, Emmanuel, for Kavitha, Emmanuel to say that, because I'm going to use that slogan a little bit more.
Yeah, I do agree with what Michael did say. In regards to like racism or colorism, I guess in professional, in my professional field, I do see a lot of microaggressions in regards to different comments that are sometimes made, especially as jokes you can see. So that can, especially being as the only person in color in the office or on a specific project, sometimes they're just trying to poke fun, and it doesn't come off as well, especially when it feels like you're fighting on your own. And with Michael saying it was a $20 billion industry in the world of skin lightening creams, sometimes I do ask myself, where does this all come from? And it's usually a big driver, I feel like, is the media. So a lot of media just likes to kind of play up the colorism and the racism in movies, in commercials, and TV. You see that a lot show up in kind of implicit bias, and unconsciously you get like all these things that you might be watching that you might not see immediately, but kind of just kind of sinks in on you. So that's something that has to change. More representation in general. So especially, you see a lot of feedback nowadays, especially when they're making true stories. They can't just cast a light-skinned woman anymore. They got to cast someone that was darker skin, that does come with its own set of problems and own set of concerns. And, they might have had their own struggles. So casting someone that doesn't completely look like that kind of sets aside all the struggles that person had to deal with, if that makes sense.
I think for me, I keep thinking about the way that like my two worlds are just kind of like colliding in terms of thinking about colorism and like skin lightening versus like, white American society now moving towards fetishizing blacker skin, darker skin. And like Michael talked about tanning, and like now wanting to be closer to a more melanated skin than like my own culture that's like also moving further away from wanting to be dark skin or like their own natural skin tone, and closer to lighter skin, and to be accepted and to be viewed as beautiful. And like just thinking about how growing up, like I would see a lot of like whitening products or like skin lightening products everywhere. And like even now when I'm like at Carmel Mall, as somebody who's like a little bit more grown up and understands a little bit more like the world of the politics of the world, and like how racism and like colorism impacts my community, it's really, really unsettling to see these products just displayed openly and like consistently consumed by my community members, and how it's promoted a lot. And so I just keep thinking about how there's like this part of the culture that I'm a part of that's like moving towards like wanting to be darker skin, and then like obviously with its rooted issues and problems and perspectives, but also like how my culture is still continuously shifting towards lighter skin, and just working to bring that type of awareness to the conversations that we're having with folks in our community. I know within my own circles and the young people that I'm with, it's not as prominent as it is within like a specific age group, like moms and like a little bit like older, like 30s, 40s, and like 50s, and folks like that. And so just kind of recognizing that there isn't a prominent like concern within the young Somali like I would say demographic, but more towards like women that are mothers and like are within that age group. And so just kind of having conversations around that when we're building workshops around, anything, like when we're organizing, when we're talking about issues that impact our communities, also bringing that awareness to that. problem of colorism and how mercury poisoning is happening within our own community when people utilize skin lightening products, and consistently having conversations. And something that like Abdullahi also talked about is like media representation. I think we're a society that's moving towards more representation, but at the same time, like it isn't everything, and like there isn't accurate representation in media for people of color and like darker skin color folks. So like just thinking a little bit more about how we, I don't know, ask for those narratives or that kind of representation is important, and that we're not fetishizing people, but also like uplifting and like prioritizing stories that impact darker skinned people.
And I just want to add a little bit to what Yasmin said, is that, you know, we're all people of color, and we do have an attachment back to or know people from overseas, back, whether it be, you know, back in the home country or somewhere around the world, where we do seem to have two beauty standards. We live in America, but we also are trying to be Americanized, I guess that's the right term. But we also want to stay true to being who we are, whether it be Hmong, Somali, or whatever we call it, or we define ourselves. We also have two standards. So then when we step into one world, well, I have this issue where I step into one world, I have to try to be a certain way or be looked at a certain way, and I would go back into a different household and perceive myself in a different way. So then I would always see beauty standards or colorism or skin lightening products back from Asia, whether it be from Thai commercials, whether it be from South Korea, for example. That's a big skin lightening place that's been producing. Same with Thailand and China as well. So those are standards that I have to look at, as well as standards in America where it could be completely different. So we might have this issue where, you know, we have people in America who are younger like us, like, no, we don't really use it. But the exact same could be said, the exact opposite could be said for our counterparts in just different parts of the world who are using these products, because that is a standard they have to use. So we do get friends or family who are from overseas, and when they do come over, they do want to use these products, mainly because that was something they're very used to. And maybe not so much for us in America, but like our counterparts are true. And that's usually what happens, is that, hey, we're getting these products because people are buying them from overseas, because they're used to this being a part of their daily routine. And that's something that they see in the media that Abdulle was mentioning about. And I think that's another struggle we have to fight with, but that's something we can't tap into because we're not in those countries, and we're not controlling the media. We're not controlling what's happening in those countries, but we can only control what's happening here in the Twin Cities or in America, or, you know, the caveat mayos in India. And so we can only control what we can in our area. So that's been a harder part, where we're trying to get a global, but we can only do it on a micro level instead of a macro level, which is kind of unfortunate sometimes.
Yeah, and to what Mike just said, I think, and what Yasmin had said in the end of her speaking, is you get into these positions, get to the table of media industries, and demand change is one of the things that can be done coming from these backgrounds. I think I really like this question that came up in the chat, so I'll ask it now and give just a short amount of time to answer so we can move on to some of the questions. But how has this I'm assuming is, you know, colorism, racism, and all of these things that have come up in this conversation impacted the panelists' sense of belonging and home? I know Mike and Yasmin, you've talked about feeling like it's two worlds, two standards that you're balanced in between. So I think you can talk a bit more about how that's impacted your sense of belonging.
I can go. I guess in sense of your belonging, you know, it's already pretty tough in regards to, you know, racism already, you know. So, you know, you're already dealing with that. And then once you kind of learn about the colorism and that kind of unfolds, and you're like, dang, another one. So it's not fun, obviously, but it definitely does hurt. And it's not something, you know, you want to be dealing with, especially when everything's already stacked up against you as a, you know, as a person of color in general. So it definitely negatively impacts you. You kind of have to, I guess, train your thinking or train your thoughts in a way that, or at least for myself, train myself in a way that, you know, those things are not true per se, or those are things that just is only going to hurt me in the long run if I do think of it in that way. So I do know that, you know, at first it did negatively impact me, but, you know, there's only so much that, you know, I can do about society's whole contribution to like colorism and racism and how that affects different types of people. But I can understand that, you know, I can kind of try and do my part in regards to like skin lightening and raising awareness in regards to colorism and racism, and how, you know, that only, I guess, if you keep the cycle going, it's only going to affect more and more people. So we kind of have to break that cycle eventually so that we don't have to, people don't have to negatively be impacted by this anymore.
I can go. I think that's a really good question. Shout out to the person who asked that. But I think really colorism does, I wouldn't necessarily say that it negatively impacted, like at least like, I know it negatively impacts obviously like all of our communities, but I'm a really optimistic person. So I think saying that like the sense of belonging, it has made me feel ostracized in at least American culture. But within the Somali culture, like my Somali identity, I feel like having conversations about colorism is slightly taboo. And so it then I feel ostracized in that identity too. But I feel like as somebody who has the knowledge that I do have, I think, you know, making sure that I am sharing what I know and making people understand that like all the ways that colorism and racism play into how we interact in the United States is important, and I think is a very difficult way to do it. And like Abdulle said, like giving yourself that grace of saying like, oh, like I can't change these systems, but making sure that you play a role within the communities that you are a part of is really the key.
Yeah, so thinking about like my own experiences and like coming to America at 8 years old and like having to navigate a whole different like culture and society, I think it was really difficult at first for me to transition and just kind of like understand why there's such an importance and heaviness on like being lighter skinned or like having straight hair, having a certain look, light eyes, light hair, everything, you know. It was like the complete opposite of who I was. And like I just remember being in like middle school, high school, and like, you know, kids who looked like me would want to change the way they looked because it made it easier to fit in and it made it easier to navigate some of these like you know, environments that we're in and like have to be in. And I just remember like having a boost of like confidence in myself because of like the way that my parents had taught me, like no matter where you go in this world, you're always going to have to carry yourself in that, like in a lot of these spaces. And so it's important to feel accepted within yourself. Like you don't need acceptance from other people. You need to do it for yourself. Otherwise you're going to continue to like burn yourself out waiting for validation from other people. And it was just really hard to see like friends of mine and like people in my community continuously suffer from that and like have to, I think Nadia said it perfectly, like feel ostracized in some of these spaces, even within my own like like community, like being in Duxi, for example, you have kids that are picked on just for being darker skin. Like it's easier to pick on the darker skin and like, you know, the kids with the nappy hair than it is to pick the kids with the like soft hair and like the small nose and like the lighter skin. And so that was something that I was also facing within my own community. And so like, it was just a really difficult, like, world to like navigate and like standards to navigate. But at the same time, I was very like self-aware that like to me this didn't matter enough for me to care and put a lot of effort into, but it also meant that like I would step aside and like, you know, let other folks who are experiencing that direct harm be able to speak to their truth. And like I don't necessarily like have the darkest skin, and so that means like I don't experience a lot of the brunt of that like hate and like just type of like treatment that a lot of my peers would face. And so being able to step aside when that time came, and then also being able to call it out when it was happening, whether it was in my own community and people didn't like that, or my own like Duxi that where people didn't like that, or if it was in school where like teachers or peers didn't appreciate me like being outspoken about that. And just continuously thinking about like acceptance is really the only thing that like sets you free and within on an individual level, and then moving towards like advocacy and making sure that people are given the space and opportunity to talk about these things and like share their experiences, and also uplift and empower those types of voices. And so that's the way that I would like think about this when we're talking about colorism and issues of like fitting in and navigating two societies.
Yeah, I haven't had as difficult of a transition trying to balance between two worlds since I was younger. I think I've kind of grown to accept who I am and go from there. And it does help that in my community, colorism is an issue, but maybe not to extent of other communities. For example, like in the South Asia, for example, community, where when I was talking to one of my coworker, and she had mentioned that there's two questions when a baby is born. The first question is a boy or girl? And the second question is it light or dark? And in my community, that isn't something that we are always asking. It is a bias. Obviously, there is a bias, but it's not perceived so much in a way where it's very discreet, per se. They might mention it here and there, but it's not a, oh, wait, we don't like you because you're darker. So I guess in a way, I've been kind of shielded a little bit compared to everyone else, so I don't have to worry about it as much. And I guess they are a little bit more tolerable in my community. At least I can say that for my community. So I don't have to experience that as much in that terms, but there is bias there as well that I do have to navigate. But you know, on a daily basis, I don't have to worry so much about, hey, my skin's a little too dark today, I should probably lighten it up or whatever it might be, so I don't get scolded at or be biased at some point. But so I am a little bit lucky. So in my community, that's kind of how it works a little bit.
Thank you so much. There are amazing questions coming up in the chat, but for the sake of time, I'll focus on the next couple. And if possible, I'll place them in the Zoom chat for you guys to answer later on if that's possible. The next couple questions are directed towards Mike, Abdullahi, and Nadia in reference to your senior seminar. You all three had a chance to participate in community impacted research in collaboration with MDH and Minnesota Pollution Control Agency on skin lightening among college students with your senior seminar, and with Professor Susi Keefe, who is the director of the CJL. How did this opportunity, or what did this opportunity do to impact you personally, professionally, academically, and what lessons from the project do you want our audience to know about?
Yeah, so I can go first. So yeah, like you said, we did have the chance to participate in community collaboration with the Department of Health, Minnesota Department of Health, working with college Hmong students talking about their experiences with skin lightening and mercury. So this was honestly, I did major in at Hamline, I did major in public health, and this was actually the first kind of time that I got to get a chance to get some in the field experience. So this was the first time where everything that I was learning, I got to be able to kind of put my skills to the test. So we were able to do literature reviews, focus groups, like data analysis, or at least qualitative data analysis. And at the end, we were able to give a presentation at the Department of Health in regards to our findings, and eventually be able to publish. But this was able to kind of open my eyes in regards to understanding how to correctly do research. And also in regards to how professionally impacting me, I would say that it made me kind of better understand how to better get stakeholders in that community involved. So when doing research, I obviously, I'm not a part of the Hmong community, but we did have people at the MDH that were Hmong, and also Micheal is Hmong as well. So we were able to kind of work with Hmong people or Hmong stakeholders that knew that community very well, and kind of have them kind of take the lead because they were part of the community. So that's something that I kind of took away from my research, and kind of like reaching out to stakeholders and community leaders and being able to collaborate with them to kind of get the best results, you could say.
Yeah, so that class was probably like my favorite part of senior year. It was minus graduation, but it was really eye-opening, and it was such a amazing opportunity and experience. So like Abdulle said, like we got that hands-on experience of doing qualitative research, you know, doing like research prior, seeing what was already out there on that topic, and then creating like a study or like a research on with that basis, coming up with questions to ask in those focus groups, making sure that, you know, your what you find, you go and bring that back to the community, and you make sure that you're sharing that with those, like obviously the Department of Health, but making sure that the questions that you're asking and the findings that you find are really encompassing of what you're trying to accomplish and what your goal is in that study. And so professionally, like I use those skills today, like I do grant work. So I hold listening sessions within the Black community on what health and healing means. So I go through that whole process that I learned and got to experience for the first time in that class.
Yeah, and I just want to add on that to what everyone's saying. It's been very helpful in my professional career as well. It has definitely helped me to do better outreach campaigns. So I do work on a lot of brochures, flyers that need to be done, and it's helped me understand that better and how to make it more effective as well. Another thing that's helped is that, you know, Abdulle mentioned focus groups. You know, just getting out of college, you know, I was over health partners helping them to learn how to do focus groups. And I was looking over their questions and see how that can be engaging or not engaging. So I was over there adding them, subtracting questions, and helping them conduct focus groups. So just those little knowledges help kind of persuade me to continue where I am today, and I continue on that work we had worked on in that class. So I do that at the MPCA, who was one of our collaborators. The woman who collaborated with us, Carol Hubbard, retired. And so then I took over her position the year after we graduated. So then I'm continuing on that work. So whatever I'm doing, it's a legacy back to our class that we did. And there's been awesome opportunities because a lot of them have gone on to public health other places. So I've worked on with one of our class members down in down in Olmsted County, Matt. So he had prior knowledge. So our classes are expanding across the country. Some of them are over at the CDC and doing every other things at MDH as well. So we've all had knowledge, and we're hoping that this class that we had are spreading the knowledge and are putting into the work that we're doing in some way or another, whether it be focus groups, grant writing, behavior stuff that Abdulla's working as well. So it's been helpful, and I'm glad that, I took this class and I did change my major to public health, but I still got a minor in biology, so that did help a little bit.
And the next question for Nadia and Abdulle is how your experience and your work with the Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Project. You guys can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So after we completed the senior seminar, in collaboration with the Minnesota Department of Health, we decided to kind of look into whether whether this can be also done with the Somali community in the Twin Cities area. So we reached out to the Truth, Racial Healing Transformation grant, and we found out that we were able to sign up for a grant to do the same research over the summer, with individual interviews with Somali elders. So with Somali elders to talk about the generational differences in regards to skin lightening creams, colorism, how they feel about the way the media portrays colorism and racism. So we were able to kind of do a lot of the same research that we were doing with the Hmong community in our class and kind of put that into the Somali community. And we did find a lot of the same outcomes in the Somali community as well.
Yeah, so like Abdulle said, we really took what we learned in our class and applied that to our model for the grant that we were working on. And so we had 20 participants, 10 female, 10 male, and Abdulle and I held those listening sessions or those interviews, and 5 were from the younger generation and 5 were from the older generation. And yeah, like Abdulle said, a lot of our findings were similar, but highlighting that a lot of the younger generation's experience or understanding of skin lightening creams is different from the older generation, where they still hold these ideas of being lighter is better. And like the younger generation just doesn't, it doesn't really mean that much to them. And I think a part of that is living in a very diverse community like Minnesota. And so, yeah, it was great.
Thank you. The next question is going to be directed towards Yasmin. In your current role at the Legal Rights Center, how do you bring your experiences as an immigrant refugee to your work in the field of legal advocacy and policy? And how do you see colorism manifest in those areas?
I think about the fact that, like, I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but there is no representation of like East African / Somali folks in the organization that I'm at, and that's something that, like, to me didn't sit right with me, because we are in a predominantly Somali / East African like area in Minneapolis. And so one of the things that I wanted to really work on, and I'm still figuring out like steps to take for, is bridging that gap, but at the same time recognizing the limits within my role, because I'm a Promise Fellow, and so my focus is to support the work of the advocacy work that we're doing and the restorative practices that we have here at the Legal Rights Center. And that is a like full-time capacity job that like doesn't allow me the space and room to be able to continuously connect with people in the community and hear about their stories and their experiences that they bring to the table. But I'm actively working to connect with folks that are doing great work in the community and bringing that to the Legal Rights Center and connecting folks and making sure that I can at least create some type of like partnership that could be built on. I don't think it's gonna stop with me, and I hope it doesn't stop with me, because there is a need within my community for legal like advocacy work and representation. And it's just not there right now, or it isn't accessible for folks. And so just kind of making sure that there is some type of like relationship built in the meantime. And then just thinking about like more representation and just having more people hired on that like look like me, who have similar skin tone or darker skin tone, and being given room to, you know, represent their community and talk to people that, you know, that they relate to and that they share similar pasts and experiences with. But also having that perspective is important to doing advocacy work, because as I said before, you cannot be an organization of and for the people without that type of conversation and like opportunity to have people from that community at the table. And so I just would like to see more people who look like me and in positions of leadership and just representation. But yeah, right now, like that focus for me is just, even in my personal time, making sure that there's more conversation happening around, you know, the things that impact the Somali community, and issues that are consistently left out when it comes to advocacy work, and having more opportunity to talk to people that are experiencing some of these issues that we advocate for.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. We have a couple questions in the chat, and I'm gonna just ask them out loud, and anybody who feels they can answer can go ahead. One of the questions is, and I guess it's a two-parter, what tips do the panelists have for tackling internal, for example, family or external microaggressions, and how can we be upstanders when we hear and see colorism-based comments instead of bystanders? Another part of the question would be, what support do youth who experience colorism have in the community? So you have one side saying, when you see colorism happening within your family or outside of it, how do you best tackle it? And then on the other side, the people who are experiencing colorism, specifically youth, how can they best get support?
I think for me, one of the things that I like to talk about with people who do that within my own community and like my own circles is that thinking about the implications of some of these things that they're saying. A lot of young people internalize things, and like when you're being told from a young age that like you're too dark, or like you can't do this, or you can't accomplish this because of the color of your skin or the skin tone that you have, it's very problematic and leads to a lot of like issues down the road. And like I said earlier, I think part of it is, yes, self-acceptance, but at the same time, it's also the environment that you're in. And so if you have an environment that's like not nurturing and like telling you consistently that you are lacking because of something that you can't control, then that's like really detrimental and impacts that young person greatly. And so I think just consistently calling it out when you see it, and thinking about making sure that the person who's saying these comments is thinking about the implications of these things and how that could be harbored by this young person. And yes, in the time, it might not be a big deal to make those slight microaggressive comments, but it is a big deal in the grand scheme of things. And then in terms of like supports, I just think about like, for me, school systems and navigating the education system, it was really difficult to find acceptance within a lot of spaces. Like it just, even like in athletics, like I really loved playing sports, and like it was still difficult to navigate it because it's like you have to look a certain way, you have to have a certain like like access to like, you know, money, and like you have to have all these things to be able to like thrive in some of those spaces. And like organized sports is like one of the things that I think about consistently in my experience in my past. If it hadn't been for the really harsh environment and like just the harsh response of coaches and like white peers, I would have probably continued playing sports because I loved competitive sports, but it was just something that I had to take a step back from because of the way that I was being treated. And a lot of it has to do with who I am and the skin tone that I have, and like the fact that I'm a Black woman in some of these spaces. And so I keep thinking about how school environments could be better, and advocate for better spaces for Black young, you know, women and like boys, and organized sports, and like some of these like after school activities could be a little bit more catering to young people of color and people who have darker skin, and like giving room and opportunity to show and prove themselves to be talented human beings and not necessarily be looked at for the things that they wear or the skin tone that they have. Yeah, I just think about creating more spaces that are like more inclusive in that way is really important. It starts at a very young age, and it's really important that they have those supportive systems from the beginning.
Yeah, thank you, Yasmin, for that. The next question is, are you seeing any shifts in views on the topic of skin lightening among older or slightly older generations? I think Yasmin talked a good amount about this before. And so any of the other panelists can talk a bit more about the generational differences in perception with colorism and skin lightening.
Yeah, so I definitely do see, I guess, just societal shifts with skin lightening and colorism, only because I feel like the younger generations are a little bit more accepting of a lot of the different campaigns that are out there in regards to kind of accepting your own skin tone and loving yourself, and other kind of campaigns that are out. But in regards to the older generation, I do feel like with the older generation, they kind of got, at least in my own community or like with my parents or older relatives, you know, they kind of got their beliefs or values, you know, when they were living back home in Somalia. So they might have gotten their skin lightening views or the idea of colorism and being fairer, having better social benefits or just better benefits in general. So I think they got that information when they might have been younger, when there wasn't obviously more information to kind of deal with the misinformation. So as I said earlier, there's a lot of benefits that there are a lot of reasons why people use skin lightening creams, you know, for better marriage purposes, for better marriageability, for people who have lighter skin get paid more, people have a higher social status. So I feel like once we kind of take colorism out of the equation for those type of things, there just won't be a benefit for that anymore. So I do think that the younger generation is seeing that, you know, that's not something that they don't want to abide by anymore. Just, you know, something that is just the color of your skin can factor into so much of your well-being, just doesn't sit right with them anymore. So I definitely do see that shift, and I can see that shift going on within the next generation or two. And hopefully, you know, this might not be a concern or even a business enterprise in the coming future, hopefully.
I just want to say that I think that shifting the older generation's ideas and like thoughts on skin lightening is really difficult, seeing as that they hold a lot of cultural knowledge, and so being a young person and doing these interviews or having these conversations it can seem hard, but I do think it's really important in making sure that the older generation doesn't perpetuate these ideas into the younger generation. So I do really want to say to like the youth that having difficult conversations with the older generation is really important, and that holding that space and being able to share what you know and what your thoughts are first brings better generational like relations, but also just like shows that you are like committed to both your like identity and your ethnicity and like your culture, but also playing a part and being like a steward in your community.
Thank you for those responses. As many of you know, our second panel is of advocates and experts in these areas. And so I want to end off this panel by asking, what would you want advocates working in this area, whether on the panel or off in community, to know about this topic?
I mentioned it before, but that it affects all races, you know, white, black, yellow, you know, red, however you want to differentiate what color shade you are. It affects everyone, and that this is something we all should be striving and working towards to end colorism. So if we can stop colorism, we'll stop the demand for skin lightening products, and we'll stop belittling every other person for the color of their skin. So I don't want to be with you because you're black. I don't want to be with you because you're yellow, or whatever it might be. So if we could stop this, we can stop a lot of that going forward. And that's my take, is that let's continue to strive forward. Let's keep pushing and see everyone for who we are, human beings.
All right, so if nobody else has anything else to add in, I want to thank everybody, especially the panelists, for coming in and taking time out of your day to discuss this. It's been an amazing conversation, and I was really privileged to moderate for you guys. I'm going to pass it off to our student coordinator, Nasro, to introduce our keynote. Outside of that, if you guys have any questions or anything, please pop them in the chat. And thank you again.
Thank you to all of our panelists today for speaking out. I am Nasra Araya, a senior at Hamline, majoring in legal studies and minoring in management. I'm a student coordinator for the CJL, and I am more than happy to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Amina Mire, today. Dr. Mire is an associate professor of sociology in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology of Carleton University in Canada. Dr. Mire researches areas such as women in health, anti-aging, sociology of gender, the medicalization and biomedicalization of women's bodies and skin, and many more areas. Dr. Mire's current project examines the globalization of the skin whitening industry. Her work centers an anti-racist and interdisciplinary feminist analysis calling out pharmaceuticals and cosmetic companies. She seeks to critically interrogate broader implications of rebranding racist marketing in the skin whitening industry in wake of global response to the decolonizing demand of the Black Lives Matter movement. Dr. Mire is a substantial publication record in this area, and has a new forthcoming book called The Changing Meaning of Skin Whitening. As a Black woman myself, it is always remarkable to see how women that look like me empower others with their work, and I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Mire to our event.
Thank you so much, and I'm actually quite empowered to be with this group of people, with the center, with participants. This is quite a long journey for me. I'm also a Somali, and I have started this journey very long time ago. Actually, I started this research in 1997. You know, I was a master's student actually in the philosophy department of the University of Toronto. We can stay on this page. I just want to center the argument that when I started this research, I was actually quite a young woman at the University of Toronto. I was studying philosophy. I was actually a master's student. And I was conducting a summer research on Somali refugees and immigrants' professional needs. Ironically, there is a Minneapolis connection with my research, because many of the professionals that I actually interviewed in my research in 1997, doctors, lawyers, engineers, find actually doors closed behind them here in Canada. They had a problem of things like accreditation, their professional skills being approved. And there has been a second migration from Toronto to Minnesota. So when I was actually invited to speak about this topic, it has a multiple relevance for me to kind of reflect how I started this entire research. And it actually affected the way I started researching this topic to begin with. And it affected that actually I shifted after I completed my master's degree from philosophy to sociology, because the philosophy department was not actually interested in allowing me to conduct a doctoral thesis on this topic. So I find it quite disheartening that the conversation is still about skin bleachers containing mercury, because I thought I did that 25 years ago and that was done with, but clearly not. So what I will do is to capture, I'm going to start with kind of a process of grounding and demystifying the nature of this practice and industry. And by showing this, I think I want to show that from the onset, that this marketing was quite ambiguous, and it actually played on both racism and colorism, and what I also would like to call it inter-group colorism and intra-groups colorism. In other words, within the group and between the groups. This ad, for instance, is for, I think, probably late 19th century, I'm not so sure, but from the language, you can see it's quite blatant. You can see the bleachers called black skin remover. Today we have things like stain remover, but you can really see. What's interesting here is you have two faces, African-American looking and Caucasian looking models. But I would like you to think about maybe reading the two images not as before and after, but vice versa. And I will show you why this is the case. I will just read the first part of this ad. So it says, a peach-like complexion obtained if used as directed will turn the skin of a black or a brown person 4 or more shades lighter. And a mulatto, in quotation, but here you can see without quotation, person perfectly white in 48 hours and or 2 or more noticeable shades. It does not turn the skin in spots, but bleaches out white. The skin remains beautiful without continual use. Will remove wrinkles, freckles, dark spots, pimples, or bumps, blackheads, making the skin very soft, smooth. What's interesting is you might want to ask, what does wrinkles have to do with, with bleaching? But there you can really see early on attempt to reach out to a broader market, to go beyond just lightening the skin, but aiming for a broader market. So I would say this was the beginning of the niche marketing of this market, and appealing to not only African-American women, but to a broader consumer basis. And you can really see, if you include wrinkles and freckles, what you know, there are many women who can fall into that category. Next page, please. Should I use mine? Oh, good. So here, quickly, I wanted to show you, because there is so much focus, at least in the entire time I've been researching on this topic, the public focus, even the activist focus has been not the sociological and philosophical and moral questions about why whitening, but is it safe? So here is a really more stark example of damage caused by hydroquinone-based skin lighteners. What actually quite is interesting about this is, this was published in 1980s in the British Journal of Medicine. But what is interesting is this hydroquinone-based 2% concentration skin lighteners has been legal, according to the FDA, as late as last year. So last year was a great year, and last year it was banned. So now you cannot legally buy hydroquinone-based skin lighteners in the United States. Second one. This is good. So instead of then stopping the whole thing, we enter a new sphere. So if health risks with mercury, hydroquinone, corticosteroids are bad for you, that's not a problem. There is a new industry called skin whitening biotechnology. This ad is from a startup company based in somewhat Carolinas or Missouri, I'm not so sure, because this is a part of my doctoral thesis. I downloaded this ad when I was writing my doctoral thesis, well, some 19 years ago. So what you see is the fear of toxic compounds, the ones that are under the FDA and health regulatory's radar, has led to a new shift, and that is high technology, melanin blocking, multi-billion dollar, I don't mean one figure, I mean $100 billion industry that is not regulated, that's thriving, and that has its tentacles in state institutions, universities, and funders by reputable companies are involved in this. And I will not read the entire ad, but just like the black skin remover, I will just read to you a little bit about this, because what's so interesting about this turn is the kind of focus on proprietary knowledge and language of biotechnological intervention at the molecular level. So the ad says, because CX838 is a natural compound approved by the FDA for drug use, not for melanin suppressant clearly, and is also found in natural dietary supplements, the safety of the molecule is well documented. Kutanex scientists have formulated CX838 into a topical gel to have conducted pilot clinical study to demonstrate that the daily use will effectively treat melasma and common hyperpigmentation, blah, blah, blah. What's so interesting is it's a melanin blocker, and it says the product will block melanin production by 90% at the molecular level. So clearly this should have attracted the FDA immediately, but clearly not. Second page, please. May I have the secondary? Good. So this one I have at least the date of the company. So this company is called Stillman's, has been doing this business since 1898. So clearly it's around this time that the US defeated the Spanish in the Manila. And actually there is an ad called White Man's Burden for Paris soap, 1891 or something like that, the day the Americans defeated the Spanish and landed on Manila. And actually, I didn't know the fact that the actor was not an actor, but Admiral Dewey, a real American admiral. So clearly you can see this skin lightening business is at least 2 centuries old. Second page, please. And here is very important, because here, this ad goes back to the kind of the biotechnological turn. This ad, again, you can see I downloaded in 2004. So it is now quite a bit, almost like 21 years old, or well, at least long time old. Lancome is one of the high premium L'Oreal subsidiary that has been on the forefront of promoting high-end skin whitening. But I want to point out to you for several aspects about this ad. First, the word melano CX, again, is that kind of biomedical suppression of melanin. The other thing is the infusion of this kind of ethereal whiteness into the face of the model as a high technology white that shields and protects. And here you can see the kind of emerging new types of whitening as a form of kind of a post, you might say, we used to call it ozone change. Now we have a climate change, but it has a lot of messages that has to do with urban pollution, has to do with lifestyle, has to do with the stress. And this is a new way of marketing high technology visually as melanin blockers that again should have attracted the FDA and other health regulators, clearly not. Next page, please. And this is L'Oreal 2020, and of course, reckoning with the demands of Black Lives Matter and the events that have ensued with the brutal killing of George Floyd. What's so interesting is L'Oreal is the biggest cosmetic company in the world. But also we have other not so big, but equally influential players such as Johnson & Johnson and Unilever. People like to talk about Unilever, but actually Unilever market, like a Fair and Lovely, yes, it's quite common. But when you look at the market share, Unilever is just a drop in the bucket. Like, you know, the biggest leaders are Shiseido, which is a Japanese company, and L'Oreal. They are the two most important promoters of high-end skin whitening market. We're talking about between $40 to $50 billion each. So they are the leaders. Therefore, this is not a market they are willing to give it up. This is a market they will rebrand. And this rebranding, as you saw from the earlier ads, have already started more than 2 decades ago. So it's not too difficult for them now to continue with the rebranding process. Turn the page, please. And here again, this is very, very important because this is Vichy is another L'Oreal subsidiary. And here you can see instead of black skin remover, now you have spot remover, but the symbolic image is still the same. You see literally a skin being ripped off as a zipper be replaced with a white looking, smooth looking, and younger looking skin. What you really see here is this kind of rebranding that the corporations that have been behind this industry have been doing, have started much earlier. And you can really see here, what you see is dark spots, uneven skin, can be smooth over as soon as you see them. So there is a biomedical discourse, there is a scientific discourse, there is a language that is promulgated in terms that are not very explicitly racist, but still contain biomedical and racializing implications. And I remember using this image in 2005. I published a piece on Counterpunch, the best thing that I ever published. And I received 600 emails within a day. So I used one of this image. This brand, actually, you can find it online. The word B-I white, be white, by this line. I'm not so sure if they will continue with that brand name, but you can find a version of this Vichy with the name Be White, with the same kind of model with this kind of zipped skin. Next one, please. And here is, again, for me to address that the limitations and the future of this industry. Clearly, the issues that we discussed today, by and large, by the activists, things like hydroquinone, mercury, corticosteroids, these things have been addressed. They are contrabands, they are underground, but this is the primary focus, and which shows the focus is about public health safety. And I think that's important. And that industry is still here, but it went underground. What has not been addressed is the primary industry, which is the biotechnology-based industry, which has been the focus of my entire doctoral work, the books I have published. You can look at my book, Wellness and Whiteness. You can look at my journal articles. I have challenged the focus on low-end, high-risk skin whitening, and my research has been a thorough and sustained engagement of unregulated and very proprietary and very lucrative high-end skin whitening that actually target not so much about poor consumers, but high-end consumers, white women as an anti-aging, and also upward mobile women, especially in Pacific and Southeast Asia. So these are the things we have to deal with, because again, it won't be too easy to deal with this, because it rebranding, like for instance, Fair and Lovely is now Glow and Lovely. If you actually look at my book, Wellness in Whiteness, which came out before the event of killing of George Floyd, I actually address entire chapter about glow is the real. Actually, there is a section in the book called The Glow is the Real. So I actually address the emerging of brighteners and glowing as the new way of rebranding this industry. So you can see I have been ahead of the curve. Turn the page, please. And what is actually quite important is that also from policy analysts, it's not easy to actually gauge the market in this, because again, if you press the word skin lightener, you might get some sort of market report. If you press the word skin brighteners, you might get another market figure. If you press the word skin whiteners, you're going to get another market figure. If you get skin bleachers, probably you will get the lowest market figure, because skin bleachers are usually kind of the crude stuff, the mercury, so in fact, even the terms that are used for this product are very specific. So it is not very easy to actually gauge the market, but I can easily tell you, after 25 years of research, the market is higher than $100 billion. What is also very important is the unregulated and lucrative market has state and corporate support, and it is also regulated as cosmetic, and it is not even regulated. So terms like, if you go now to the FDA website and look at the terms like skinceuticals, cosmeceuticals, the FDA will tell you exactly this have no legal standing, and yet it's a $100 billion industry with no legal standing. So that is also another way that it will be very challenging to actually confront the health, the moral, the ethical, and social implications of this industry. And I think it has been actually to the benefit of this industry that social activists have focused on mercury and the crude, illegal contraband stuff, and kind of didn't even realize there is an industry much higher than many other legitimate industry that has not been regulated, and that is actually draw from skin whitening biotechnology, and that's kind of ironic. So turn to the page. So I noted really some really clever response. I saw one ad, Black Lives activist, and the banner says, "Melanin is not your enemy." I find that is one of the ways we can actually overcome this insidious industry, is to actually focus the kind of the things like love your melanin. And I think that has already been addressed by our clever activists and policymakers here. So I was actually very pleased to see, because the industry is very powerful. It has, the industry is too huge. And I think some of you will be shocked to realize that this is over $100 billion industry. So it's not gonna go quietly. But just like tobacco, there is a possibility that if you keep the radar, not just on mercury and hydroquinone, but on the high-end stuff, then they will have to come up with another option. But it will have to be exposed. At least the regulators and legislators will have to realize, why is there a market bigger than the legal cosmetic market that's not regulated by the FDA? I wrote to one guy in the FDA, I won't mention his name, and he actually chastised me and he said, this is our job, it's not your job. And I realized that was his job, but hey, I tried to be helpful. Turn the page. And here you can see actually a recent response that unfortunately, the market still continues. And based on this, just a recent report I saw in Asia, and here you can see if Fair and Lovely is now Fair and Glow. The market is too lucrative for those who benefit from it to let it go. And so the market continues, but also our activism and our resistance has been immensely empowered and increased by the global reckoning with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think this is fundamentally energized our focus on this hidden industry. And I think we need to do better and, to actually kind of not let them off the hook, whether they are doing it in Asia, or are they doing it in the United States, or are they doing it in Africa. We should not let them off the hook. Today, good thing is we can actually find electronic traces of what they do, because you post things online and anybody can see it anywhere in the world. So we just have to shame them continuously. Turn the page, please. And here is my concluding remarks. And I will definitely say that the broader struggle against this will require sustained focus on it. The other thing really is that we need to really overcome the idea that somehow we can overcome colorism when we're not addressing the meaning of whiteness. I mean, people have already addressed the notion of the whiteness has a different meaning, but people don't even realize the word white as a kind of encompassing category. The terms like Caucasian don't have the word Caucasian was adopted in the United States after World War II. Before World War II, there were actually different types of races of white. There were no encompassing white race. There were kind of Celtic, Slavic, Mediterranean, Albines, and of course, at the tip of it, the Anglo-Saxon. All those things now have been merged into one all-encompassing category after, of course, in response to the tragedies of what Nazi Germany did. So we need to actually question that, in fact, that performing the body as passing for white happens not only for light-skinned people of color, but Black-looking, Mediterranean-looking, olive-toned Europeans. And actually that has all been one of the biggest markets in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And I think still hair straighteners, skin lighteners appeal to all kind of groups. And therefore we need to really kind of critique the simplistic way that we talk about colorism within a group and race as something else, because we are constantly suturing the color line, not realizing that's what we are actually doing it. So we need to actually kind of like expose the kind of the artificiality of the color line. And I think, of course, there are things that policymakers and healthcare professionals can do. And I think at least the policymakers and the FDA in particular can go after anybody who says my product will suppress melanin, because according to the FDA, that's a health claim, that's a biomedical claim, and it should be shut down. So I think, I just don't want to give a kind of a rosy response, because I have been on the trenches about this issue 25 years. So, I know this is a long-term struggle. So I'm going to stop there And I hope I didn't go over time, and I'm open for questions or even officiating the panel afterwards. So I hope I didn't go over time.
You did not. That was perfect. Thank you so much. We do have a minute if there are any questions at this time directly for Dr. Mire, but if not, we can introduce the panel.
Yes.
Go ahead, Reina.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the exceptional keynote, Dr. Mire. We really appreciate hearing from you. Hello, my name is Amina Mire. I am a senior political science and history double major at Hamline and a student coordinator for the Center for Justice and Law. Thank you again so much, Dr. Mire, for such an inspiring and informative keynote that provided us with historical context for the harmful trends we see today. You have given us so much to think about as we near the end of today's event. So I'm here to welcome you all to our second panel, The Future of Skin Lightening Perspectives, where you'll hear from a group of advocates and experts on the topic. Throughout the day, we've been lucky enough to hear from activists and those who have experienced or whose communities have experienced the effects of skin lightening and colorism firsthand. So with this panel, we will expand our lens to include those who have addressed these issues with academic, legislative, and advocacy approaches. We will hear from community health advocate Asha Mohammed, Minnesota State Senator Sandy Pappas, student and community health and student and skin lightening advocate for the city of Minneapolis, Fatu Berry, journalist Priya Rao, and BBC producer Gunan Adamu. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Amina Mire, again, who will moderate what is sure to be an interesting and insightful discussion.
I can actually see the panelists here. Is Rihanna one of the panelists? Yes? No? So let's start, Priya. How are you, Priya?
Good. Hi, everyone. I'm Priya Rao. I'm a journalist based in New York City, and I write for a publication called Glossy. And last year, I produced a podcast called Unfair in response to the racial reckoning and the colorism and racism we were seeing out of the Black Lives Matter movement. It was a 5-part series. It was Apple recommended. I encourage all of y'all to listen to it. And I'm really excited to be here today.
Wonderful. I was interviewed for that, but they cut me out because they didn't like my critical.
No, I mean,
yes, I was a subscriber to Glossy, and I was interviewed, and it didn't make it.
I mean, we have so much extra
footage. Don't worry.
We have so much extra footage. Don't worry. I have another project coming up.
No problem.
Don't worry.
Okay. Our next speaker. Love it. Yes. I'm my fingers are everywhere. I know what's going on. Yes. Okay. I just want to make sure I introduce the next speaker. So I think it's a sister from Kenya. So I don't know how to pronounce it. Just tell me your name. Nguga?
Oh, Gunan. It's Gunan.
Okay.
Gunan. So I'm Nigerian. I'm a Nigerian.
I just assumed you are Kenyan. Like Nguga with Yanga. Yes.
Yeah. So my name is Gunan Adamu. So I'm based in the UK. So I'm a BBC journalist. I also work internationally as well. So I work in Africa and Asia. But my main passion is working on a Black African Caribbean show for the Merseyside community. So Merseyside is the northwest of the UK. So I wrote an article for Welcome Collection here in London around skin bleaching, but also the psychology and the history of skin bleaching as well, from an African perspective.
It's wonderful. And Rihanna.
Oh, I will not be speaking on this panel. I just introduced, but I can't wait to hear what everyone else has to say.
So we have a panel of 3, no?
I believe.
Amina, I'm also on the panel. This is Senator.
Yes, because I don't see. Yes, please.
Very thrilled to be with you all on this very esteemed panel. And I'm a legislator. I'm a senator in the state of Minnesota, and the author of some educational grants on the topic of skin lightening. And I can talk more when it's my turn.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I was actually looking for the legislator, the senator. So I'm glad you're here because you have power. Yes, you have power to do something about this.
I'm also on the panel. My name is Fatu, and I'm a senior at the University of Minnesota, and I work for the City of Minneapolis Health Department, and I work on the Skin Lightening Education Public Awareness Grant that we were given. And so I'm just here as like a representative, and I've been working on the grant for about a year plus now. So.
Wonderful. And who else is the panel? Because I cannot see everybody on my screen.
I can go next. My name is Asha Mohammed. I work with Welshare International, a nonprofit. I'm a recent Master's of Public Health graduate at St. Kate's, and I've been working on this topic in the Somali community, and I can talk more about that when it's my turn. So yeah, that's all I have for now.
Wonderful. And as you all just to hear my view research on racism and skin lightening industry, many of you on this panel live in town in Twin Cities. I love to come to Twin City. Closest I got was in Winnipeg, so I'm not there, and have experienced the international protests which began in response to the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent racial reckoning in our local and national and global context. What does this means for you? I think I am burning, but I rather see the rest of the panel first address it, because that's very dear to me. Yes. Priya, start with, yes.
In the hot seat first, huh?
Yes.
Well, I think that this is a very personal issue. I'm Indian American. My family moved here before I was born. I'm the first person in my family to be born in the US. And, I think colorism and racism was always kind of latently discussed in my household, and I saw it and I felt it, but I wasn't exactly sure I could pinpoint it, I guess I would say. It was very subtle. And I think I work primarily in the beauty industry as a journalist and cover many of the companies that are shilling these products. And I think what was very stark last year was just in the wave of, the deaths and murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and of course, George Floyd, that, corporations were finally coming out and saying like, hey, I really care about this. Black Lives Matter, XYZ, we care about minorities, when in reality, all of their actions prior were not that. I think it was really stark to me when I think it was Aunt Jemima, the maple syrup company, coming out and saying like, Black Lives Matter. And I think even when Unilever, which is a company that I cover quite a bit, was saying this, it was very much in stark opposition to what the products they were selling and the products that they were promoting, that said these women, these men were not good enough. These having melanin in your skin tone was not the ideal. So I think for me, it kind of blew the cap off, and it made people really understand what I think people like myself and people on this panel have experienced their whole lives in the US and abroad. And now it's just about using that megaphone to really, not let it slip and continue to kind of have this conversation.
Yes. Inunan, how I think sort of like
ignore.
I gotta have practice ahead of time.
Ignore the end. So just Gunan.
Yes.
Yeah, ignore the end.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with Priya. So my family's Nigerian, and from your research, you'll see Nigeria has one of the highest uptakes of using skin bleaching products. And so my mother is fair-skinned and my father's dark-skinned. So growing up outside of the household and but still with family members, it was always this thing of, if only you took your mother's complexion, or if only you were lighter, or if you, and then, growing up in the UK, it was always the same thing. Oh, you'd be so much prettier if you're light-skinned. So you always, I always heard these comments, but I was really lucky that I came from a family that parents that always told me I was beautiful. So I didn't fall into that trap of wanting to be light-skinned. If anything, it actually made me more defiant. But I think the sad part is the role that the media plays in how dark-skinned people are looked at. So when you look at screen, the majority of presenters or actresses are light-skinned women. But also when you look at Black men, they're always with light-skinned or white women. So it never ever painted dark-skinned women as beautiful, so it was always, I think it was always a problem for society to appreciate dark-skinned women. And when you see dark-skinned women, for example, Naomi Campbell, Naomi Campbell was one of the Iman, dark-skinned women. When the media really embraced them, it's like they held them to this high esteem. But then it was, they went back to that trap again of light-skinned women. So it was that kind of one in, one out policy. So when Iman was, she was glorified and she was the standard of beauty for a long time, and then Naomi Campbell came in, then it was like they wanted them to kind of knock heads, so they've never wanted us to be friends and embrace this kind of all Black is beautiful mentality. But I have seen a change since George Floyd and the uprising of Black Lives Matter, where now the media is saying, oh no, we care about you. However, I think through my travels, especially through the research that you've done, Amina, a lot of these companies are very clever with their wording. So, for example, L'Oreal would never sell skin or promote skin lightening products in the UK. However, when I've gone to Dubai or I've gone to, say, like India, I've seen L'Oreal selling skin lightening products. So yes, I think Black Lives Matter has helped in the West in terms of America and the UK, but we're still fighting colonialism and skin bleaching in when we go back home, so to speak.
I agree. Fatu.
Yeah, I think going on with what Ganan said, I think a lot of media has started to shed a lot of light. And as someone that lives in Minneapolis and works for the city of Minneapolis, where the murder occurred, I think that really impacted a lot of my work, because I began working on the grant last year, which was prior to the murder occurring, but subsequently a lot of our work didn't take off until about October, so like a few months after the murder occurred. And so a lot of like the people we met with and a lot of the organizations we spoke with had just started to become aware of the issue of how like Black people are depicted in the media, and how like Ganan said, oftentimes you only see lighter skinned women being represented. And so it kind of fueled the work that we're doing a lot right now and gave it a lot of context and meaning.
Thank you. Senator Sandy.
Thank you. Well, since I'm the only white woman on the panel, I obviously haven't had personal experience with this, but I do represent a very diverse district. And so racial equity is at the top of my agenda always. And I do have a personal connection in that my legislative assistant at the time, and this was actually pre-George Floyd, it was pre-COVID that we worked on this. Ankita Verma is her name, and she's East Indian. And she is dark-skinned, and she shared with me the pressure that she got from her family to use skin whitening products. And she actually testified at the hearing that we had on the bill, which, I can talk about the legislation a little bit later. So I was happy that I had, access in my office to someone who had that personal experience that could really inform the legislative work that we were doing.
Thank you so much. Asha.
Yes, for me, it's kind of hard to link the protests with like necessarily this topic, but experiencing like being in the city, like Fatu said, and seeing like the uproar from that. And honestly, I was one of the protesters during this time, because it was something that really angered me, George Floyd's death. And I think it was just another form of how, I guess, America, or like, I guess the Western world, I could say, demonizes Black people and Black skin. And I felt like people were more concerned about the response rather than what has occurred, and like the death of someone, and watching that video was very traumatizing. And I felt like people were more concerned about like Target and the response to that death rather than what happened. And to me, that was kind of like just another way of seeing how Black people and Black skin is repeatedly demonized.
We all felt that pain, I think. Is there any any of the questions raised by the panelists? Yes, please, Priya.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting, Asha, what you said, because I think what people were so surprised by, at least for me, from the journalistic point of view, covering it and like covering what L'Oreal and Unilever and all these people were saying, was just that if you look forward a few years earlier and when Colin Kaepernick took a knee and how divisive that was, and how, you know, he basically got kicked out of the NFL, and how, you know, the NFL was saying like people aren't coming to games, and then just fast forward a few years later, and it was demanded by the customer, demanded by the public for someone to say something. And so that's why I think there were so many missteps at the beginning. And it was very much like, you know, you're not practicing what you're preaching, but you're just coming out and saying something. And then it was like you stepped into a minefield. And that's what I think is interesting about what the corporate America response was, because, you know, I've done a lot of stories since, and it's like, so what has been the action that has been taken place? And like Amina said, you know, when you think about what Fair and Lovely did in India, they changed it to Glow and Lovely. Glow, like Amina said, is synonymous with whitening, bleaching, brightening. And you see that here in the US too. Like go on to, I remember for the podcast, I looked on Amazon, like skin bleaching, skin whitening, and tons of products that you know and love that you could buy at Sephora or Target would come up. And the same thing would happen on Facebook. So clearly people are putting SEO dollars and marketing dollars against those terms. They just don't want to really be called out for it.
Absolutely.
I was going to add as well. Oh, sorry, can I just add something?
Yes, please.
It was interesting. So as part of my job, I went to India, and it was during the time when I was writing my article for Welcome Collection. So I was really intrigued to see different adverts in different parts of the world. And there was an advert, I can't remember which product it was, but you know, you had this young woman. She was dark-skinned, she was sweeping the road, and, you know, she was seeing all these fair-skinned women, you know, living the high life in a drop-top car. And as she's sweeping the road, this leaflet for a skin bleaching product flies towards her. So she looks at it, and with the money that she saved from sweeping the road, she goes and buys this cream, and it says results. I think it was like results in 1 week. So from being dark skinned, she's then light skinned, and then she meets this man. Then she gets this, you know, now she's got the convertible, now she's got the job, she's got the family. And I just thought, oh my God, all of this just by being fair skinned. So in my research, it was, you know, a lot of these women, they don't want to be white. That's not what they want to be. They just want a lifestyle, and being fair skinned is a lifestyle that they can, that is at reach for them. That's what these products tell them, you know. But also, if you're looking at getting married, most men in some of these countries are encouraged to marry light-skinned women. So a lot of these women don't want to be in their 30s and single. They think, well, to be married and have a good life, I need to be light-skinned. So they are encouraged to start bleaching from the age of 16.
Fair and Lovely is very good at that.
Exactly.
So we have tons and tons of questions. So I have to be a little bit rude. So we're going to start with the next question. And there are questions that are specific to specific members. So the second question, if I'm correct, it says, what first brought you into this work? What inspired you to become an advocate for the harmful effects of skin lightening? And this is, I think it should be a kind of a quick response, because I think we have a much more elaborate questions that will come afterwards. And the question has a second part, and the second part is, what are some of the challenges, barriers you have experienced when advocating? So it's a part one, part two. So what do you know, so to go to what brought you into into this work, you know, and the harmful effect of skin lightening. You can see the question has also a second part and say that, what do you believe, how do you believe your work and or work of your organization advances skin lightening advocacy? What are what are you most proud of in terms of the contribution of your work? What are the challenges? What are some of the challenges?
Amina, if I could quickly interrupt, we can stick to one question for
so
now.
don't combine them, don't rush them. Good.
Yes.
So I was
question,
trying to kind of like squeeze them. No. This was not a classroom. So
no, it's no problem at all.
It's not a classroom. It's a much more good. I like that. So what first brought you into this question? What inspired you to become an advocate for the harmful effect of skin lightening? Good. I like that direction because I was kind of panicking. I thought maybe we have too many questions and little time. So I was like taking my professorial introduction, but good. So let's start with this time with Nunan, yes.
Nunan. You'll be having nightmares about my name. My passion for this subject came from my family, mainly my family, and seeing aunties of mine who bleached, and many of them, you know, back in the 60s were air hostesses. So they bleached to fit into that kind of lifestyle. And they carried on bleaching into their 60s and 70s, and seeing the effects of skin bleaching on their skin, like it was really, really tough. So, but then looking at the effects of skin bleaching in the community as well. So for me, I really wanted us to have that conversation and have an open conversation about skin bleaching, but also letting the outside world know that actually these women, yes, it might be a choice that they've brought these products, but actually it's the community that has forced their hands to skin bleach. It's not, you know, not everyone is as strong as we are in terms of not bleaching. So I wanted to really look at the psychology of skin bleaching and not just the fact that women are bleaching their skin. So that was a big driver for me.
Fatu, quickly, what brought you to this challenging area?
Yeah, I think for me, so as a young woman, I'm 21 and I've lived in America since I was 4, but I still have experienced a lot of colorism, like Ganan said, like through my family, and just kind of hearing about it. And I've known about skin lightening products since I was probably like old enough to remember about them, and just hearing stories about them. And specifically, one thing that really like got me into it was just like when my mom would talk about how she was like the last one of her siblings to get married because she had the darkest skin. So she got married when she was 30, but she had some of her siblings, she's one of 9. One of her siblings got married at like 16 because she had like fairer skin. And so just kind of hearing like about that and just being like, oh, okay, well, I have darker skin. Like, is that something I'm going to experience? And like in America, it's still like, I'm still navigating colorism and all of that. And so I think it's a really important topic, and I've never personally used the products, but again, I know people that use them, and I know for a while before I got really into it, like I knew that like my mom was using them, and so that was a conversation that I had to have with her, and a lot of this work was kind of stunted by my mom.
Senator Pepes, what drove you to dive into this challenging issue?
Thanks for the question, Amina. I had a Somali woman in my district, Amira Adawe, who also was a member of my Rotary Club, and she gave a presentation on the topic. And so we started working together. She worked for the Minnesota Department of Health as well and had started doing some research. So it was really her bringing the issue to my attention that led me to work on the legislation.
Good for you. Asha, and
Yes.
what was your driving?
Oh, I did want to say that Amira couldn't join us today because she's actually in Kenya doing research on this topic.
There you go. Wonderful. Asha, and you, what brought you to this really challenging advocacy? It's not easy to advocate something like this.
Yes, especially I think in the Somali community. I think one of the things that brought me into it was realizing that like how much it affected younger women and also even older women, the widespread of the products, the mixing, like I would see people not only using one product, but mixing a whole bunch of products. And sorry, give me 1 second.
Don't worry, these things happen. Yes.
Yeah, so it was just seeing that people like mixing a whole bunch of skin bleaching products, not knowing which chemicals are in each one, and just stamping like a name brand on it and selling it. Like I can go to Carmel Mall or any Somali mall right now and pick up these products, and I just thought this is dangerous and needs like some serious community awareness.
Good for you. Maria, now you take the last seat. So you'll have the last say.
I think like many of you, I think this is something that was hit very close to home. You know, my mother is very fair. She looks more Persian than I think she does Indian, and my father is much darker. And I remember very much like, oh, how people talked about my mom, how she was like the most beautiful woman in the world because of her fair skin, and how much that was equated beauty. And I think also what I realized is just that it wasn't just beauty, it was about opportunity. You know, people looked at you a little bit differently. People, you know, I grew up in South Texas, and you know, it was a benefit if people were confused about what kind of race I was, if I was Hispanic, or if I was half Black, or if I was half white. And I just realized like the power that yields over women, you know, is really terrifying. Just the idea that, you know, you can't be yourself, you're not allowed to be your truest self in order to kind of accomplish the things that you want, whether it's a family, a husband, a career. And so that's kind of where it really all started.
Good for you. So this is the second, we are going to read now the second general question. All the other questions I will raise is directed toward a specific participant. So this is the last general question. What are some of the challenges, barriers you have experienced when advocating? Advocating, by which I mean, I think what was meant by in this area. Maybe, you know, I think the focus is on skin lighteners, skin whiteners, yes. So who should I start with this time? Asha.
I'm sorry. So for me, I feel like the way that our work contributed, that's what you're asking, right?
What barriers, challenges and barriers here is kind of the pushback, the barriers that you have faced, you know, in doing this.
Okay, so the barriers for me was, of course, this is someone's income. So when you're like addressing people in the malls and this is what they're selling and this is their source of income, it's a very sensitive topic. And they also feel like, oh, what if this person is coming here to report me to either MDH or some type of legal personnel? So they automatically, it's just like that guard, like, oh, are you here to
report,
create some kind of a fine, yeah, against me? So, and for me, it's just like, no, I'm just here to educate you on this. And from that point on, you make the decision that you want, but I at least want to give you that platform to know. So I feel like that sense of mistrust was one of the main barriers that we had.
Good. Senator Pepes, have you had maybe ridicule or some of your colleagues saying, what are you doing with this? Yes.
Well, I actually never got a chance to explain what we were doing, which is basically funding educational efforts by local governments and nonprofits on the issue and the dangers of skin lightening materials. Because they are, as you mentioned, they are illegal, but they're able to be obtained on the illegal market. So for me, it's really a structural thing. I'm making it a priority to address the health needs of women of color and men to a certain extent, and to get the funding that's necessary and get enough funding to really be able to educate the community. So there's some institutional racism in the Minnesota Senate, surprise, surprise. And it's our job to make sure that we educate and we advocate for this kind of funding so we can help inform the community so they can make good, safe choices.
Wonderful. Fatou, what challenges have you faced in advocating for this issue?
Yeah, I think mine is very similar to Asha's, where there's a lot of hesitancy when you're going in to have those conversations. And something unique to our grant funding is that we're actually going into stores and attempting to purchase the skin lightening products back for them and dispose of them properly. And so that's something we've been navigating, and we've been working closely with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to have conversations on, how to go about it, how to not go in with a lens of, oh, like this is enforcement, but kind of like, hey, we want to like educate you. We want you to know why these products are harmful and toxic, what messages they're sending, and we don't want you to lose any money. So we're offering to buy them back from you. And so that's something that's been really difficult. We've been working on it for a few months, and we're starting that outreach actually next week, which will be very exciting. And I hope it goes really well. But that, and also another thing personally for me is that a lot of the communities I'm going into are East African and Hmong, and I'm West African. And so there's oftentimes like either like a language barrier, or I feel as though like the information we want to disseminate, we can't have those conversations as effectively as could be because of like the translator that's involved.
Very challenging. I think I'm trying to say this name.
Gunan, ignore the N.
Yeah, Gunan, yes.
So mine is a little bit different because a few of the councils in the UK, mainly in London, are working to eradicate a lot of these products. So they have laboratories that test these products to make sure that they don't have harmful ingredients in them. My challenge has mainly been the resistance from women in different communities because number one, they feel like it makes them look bad, because within the community you will hear people saying, oh, they want to be white, but then so lots of them are hiding their bleaching. But then when I'm having these conversations with them, it's as if they feel that I'm painting them as, not happy with who they are. They have insecurities, whereas what they're saying to me is they just want to be fair-skinned because of A, B, and C. But also, another challenge is that a lot of the products that the hair and beauty shops sell are actually quite cheap. So if we're trying to eradicate a lot of these products, the women who are buying them, that's what they can afford. They can't afford those, 50, 60, 100 pound so-called skin brightening products that may be a lot healthier for their skin. So there's a lot of issues there where even though if we're targeting the main companies and the main shops that are selling them, it affects those women because that's what they're used to buying, even though you're trying to tell them that actually, no, it's not safe, but they just don't want to hear that word. So that's where the resistance and the challenge comes from my end.
Absolutely. Priya, what are some of the challenges you have faced in dealing with this issue?
Well, I think funnily enough,
as an advocate,
I think funnily enough is a lot of people don't understand it. I think really nowadays people are very rarely understanding the nuance between colorism and racism, and they're not the same thing. I think that's very much a part of like how we kind of start talking about it. There's this great book, and now it's a Netflix movie called Passing that's out right now, and it talks about just being able to pass as white. And this book is from the 1920s, and they just screened it to a movie. So I encourage all of y'all to watch it if you have a chance, because you can kind of understand that nuance. But at the same time, I think people are kind of like, oh, we talked about it once, that's all we need to do, and we can change. As a journalist, I think when you're reporting on these things and when there aren't a lot of changes happening day to day, and companies are not addressing it, it's very frustrating because it's not only unrealistic beauty standards, but unrealistic standards for life. So, when you see it's kind of the same parallel of people like getting, doing plastic surgery in dangerous environments, or, using hair treatments that can burn their scalps in the African-American communities. And I think that people don't realize like this toxic beauty aspect to all of this, that we are just kind of really harming ourselves and hurting ourselves. And that can't be shouted out from the rooftops more than it can. I think more and more people need to be talking about it. It needs to be covered in the media more. And, there isn't a prioritization. I'm seeing this from the chat, that it's not one or the other. You can be you can have an experience with colorism and racism, or you can be either or. It's not, they're not mutually exclusive.
This is really very difficult issue, as you said. So I am now entering the domain where questions are directed to one or two people. So here I have the first question that is directed to two people, and either of them can take it or both will address it. And that's Priya and Gunun. Gunun. Am I saying correct?
Gunan. Just ignore, just Gunan.
Gunan and Priya. And they say, how does storytelling, this is very important, how does storytelling feature in your advocacy? What are the advantages of this approach? Storytelling.
Oh, do you want me to go first, Priya? So I think from my perspective, I present an African Caribbean show. So I'm really big on not making the community look bad, because when we talk about skin bleaching, it does paint a bad picture, because it says that we're not happy, we are not comfortable being Black. So for me, it's saying that is not the case. It's not about uncomfortability. It's not about being white. It's about looking at the psychology that we as a community sometimes create for ourselves. So I kind of link that with, colonization, decolonizing the mind, but looking at the historical abuse of what, from my perspective, the British have done to our communities. So that's how I use storytelling, is kind of breaking it down back to history and saying, this is what colonialism has done to our community, and so so storytelling for me is creating that narrative and that story to allow anyone outside of the community to fully understand the impact of colonialization. So that's my angle.
I very much like the kind of taking the stigma out of it, because especially this is true among Africans. I know among the Somalis, they don't see doctors until they are quite ill, especially because there is this kind of shaming and stigma attached to skin lighteners. I'm glad that you demystify. So the next question is tripartite. So I think probably I can address it maybe into one.
I think Priya hasn't answered her question yet.
Priya, come in.
Oh, no problem.
Remind me all this.
No problem. I think, for me, and, especially when I was doing Unfair, and, I have a kind of a continuation of that project that I'm working on, it was really creating the similarity. One, it was just that, what I found in my research was it was not just the Hmong population, it was not just the Somali population, it was not Hispanics, it was not Blacks, it was not Indians, it was all of us. And the relationship between, what was happening in Texas on the border, and in California or in Minneapolis, and that we were all kind of being tricked almost into subscribing to this standard of beauty, or subscribing to this colonial mindset that, white is right or white is better, and that the closer you can get to that is the way to go. And I think what was also impactful was having real people share their stories, whether it was they had used skin bleaching products or whitening products, or they had tried to overuse different from their dermatologists. Because in reality, this is an epidemic. It's just that I think that because we are talking about it in different subsets of communities, sometimes people don't realize the magnitude of the overall issue. So that was really important to get across in my work.
Good, and I will look for your videos now. I can use it in my teaching. Good. So next question is directed toward Senator Pepes, Asha Mohammed, and Fatou Berry. And for Senator Pepes, the question is, you co-authored a bill that appropriate funding for skin lightening awards, grants. And Asha, Fatou, your organization are recipient of the grant. So is this a question or just information?
That's just the background information. The next one is directed towards the senator.
So the next question, Senator, good. So that was the background. So Senator, I think there's only one senator in this panel. Since the bill was passed, what do you believe this work has contributed to immigrant and refugees community in the Minnesota, Minneapolis, amen, I consider it to be the Minnesota. What do you believe is the future of this work? What do you want to see from the Minnesota legislators? Very harmful and very good question. So take over.
Thank you for that question. Actually, sometimes we pass bills and we don't really know the impact. So it's very useful to be on a panel and to have this discussion from people who actually received the grant and to let us know how it went, because it was only one-time money. So, and I need to know that if I want to get the grant renewed in this next legislative session. So this is actually very useful and very helpful for me to meet all of you. And hopefully Fatou could come in and testify if we get a hearing to renew the grant money and to get more money so that we can reach more communities.
And this is actually follows from the second question again, Asha and Fatou. What do you have, what have your organization done with the resources, the grant provided? What have you learned from the opportunity to advocate for this topic? What do you want people to know who are listening here today about your work? So
I can go first. So for me, the work that we did was first we reached out to the community where we were working with just East African for now, since that's what the grant approved. And what we did was we did focus group discussions to kind of see where the community is at currently, because we didn't want to just come in and start doing work and not know where the community is. So it seemed like there was a lot of information on mercury, but not necessarily the understanding of what health impacts it has. And also there are other chemicals other than mercury. So like addressing the hydroquinone, the steroids that are in some of these products. So we had to like kind of touch base on the other chemicals that are in these skin bleaching or skin whitening products. And also another thing was the way that these skin bleaching or whitening products have been branded. Now they're seen as like herbal, natural, and not harming. So they kind of find new ways to kind of trick you into buying it. And it's not even like addressed towards skin whitening necessarily or bleaching. Sometimes they talk about removing dark spots or freckles. So people, even like educated people, quote unquote educated people, are buying these products and thinking that it's okay. Like, oh, I didn't know that this product had mercury or any form of chemical. So I think it was really hard because you're trying to educate people that are quite educated and those that are selling these products, and you have a lot of those barriers. So I felt like, honestly, yes, we did work on educating the community and addressing those people that are selling, those people that are consuming, but I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and we kind of just scratched the surface for now.
Thank you. Fatou.
Yeah, so our grant, when we applied for it, it was mainly geared towards youth ages 14 through 19, because as a lot of us talked about, a lot of this is rooted deeply in a lot of our communities and cultures. And so you'll see older individuals that have been using it for years and years on end. And so we kind of took the lens of it as in like approaching them when they're younger and educating them. So a lot of our material is centered around like loving your skin and not using these brightening products, and then educating them on why. And so we use like a train the trainer method. And so we have like a lot of partner organizations that work directly with youth or have connections to youth. And we created a training, and then we train them on all things like skin lightening, you know, how to identify skin lightening products, mercury. And another important thing is how hazardous these materials are just to dispose of in general. And so that was kind of like the first step of it. And then we also created like a communications campaign. And so there's bunch of flyers that we created. We were on several like radio shows in multiple different languages. We created a YouTube video with a local dermatologist who also did some work with skin lightening. And so that was really cool. And So we sent those videos to our partners and all of our other communications in hopes that they'll go on and share it and just begin that initial outreach. Because as Asha said, we're just barely scratching the surface. This work has been going on since Amina started it. It's still going on. It'll continue into the future. And so we're just beginning the work. And then, as I'd mentioned before, another unique thing that we're doing is the buyback program. And so decreasing access to the products is one of makes sense, like one of the ways you can stop people from using them, because if they're not accessible, then they can't purchase them. And so just trying to work with retailers and go in with like a lens of education on why these products aren't good to sell, and also they're illegal to sell. And so there could be in 2017 there was a search and seizure at the Hmong market where they confiscated a lot of the skin lightening products. And so we're going in kind of like as like a preventative measure, because a lot of people, like Asha had said earlier, this is like their livelihood. They're only selling skin lightening products. And so if we as a city can work with them to help them find like a different product to sell or help them transition and make sure that they don't lose money in the future if a search and seizure does happen, you know, like just kind of helping the community out and being there as support. And so I think that kind of answered it. Yeah.
The next question is really, let me see, I hope I didn't lose where I was. Let me see, where am I? Oh my God, because I moved the things up. So I think the next question is, oh my God, I think I moved the things up. So I'm gonna see where I am, the next question. The next question seems to be more general. And that is directed toward the community. I know because I read the thing is that what challenges do you actually face, especially when you are trying to reach out to the very community that are affected by this issue? I think that some of these things have already been addressed in terms of fear, in terms of if I don't sell this, then I'll have no, livelihood. So this has been addressed, but I think maybe the people who are on the front line could address maybe one or two of the biggest challenges that you face in reaching out to the very community that have been impacted as an advocates. Yes, this question is addressed to probably everybody. But I think that the people who are on the front line, community advocates may want to start this conversation. Maybe
I was just going to say real quick, when I was when I was writing the piece, so many of the women did not want to be named. They wanted to stay anonymous, which was sad, really. So that was a barrier for me. Even if we wanted to take this to court or take it further, where they were buying these products, they would not testify. So the councils needed to be able to go in and test these products to make sure that they were. That was another way of them fighting, because women in the community were refusing to talk openly about using these products.
Fatou, what do you think? I think you've already mentioned some of the fears and in terms of retailers, but maybe you want to add something else to the community at large, some recurring challenges you encounter as you advocate for this topic.
Yeah, I think one of the main things is just not wanting to facilitate a conversation about the skin lightening products. I think that's something that's been really difficult, and one of the other target audiences is families. But since we're going through youth, a lot of the youth don't know about, skin lightening products, or have never been exposed to it. And so we're facilitating that conversation with them, and then hoping they go and in turn try and facilitate that conversation with, their parents or other individuals they know using that product. But it's oftentimes like an uncomfortable conversation to have, or a lot of people don't know how to begin it. And a lot of our work is contingent on the people we train going out and having those conversations. And so just trying to figure out what's the best way to, bring up the conversation when they're interacting with someone and not feel as though they're targeting that individual. It's a lot of things like that I've found challenging.
Anybody else want to add, lived experiences of facing barriers, especially when trying to reach out to the affected community? Anybody else quickly want to add
Yes.
Yes.
I think some challenges are, it's kind of hard to find the balance because when you see those that are like educated on this topic and they don't do skin lightening, you see that they tend to sometimes stigmatize those that are using bleaching products. So it's hard to kind of like find that balance and say, let's not stigmatize them because this is effects of, like Gwanan was saying, effects of colonialization and a lot of things that make people want to, I guess, to dabble into these products. So I think that was very challenging for me personally. And also another thing that was quite challenging is reaching out to like the moms that would like whatever they say affect their children. Sometimes we have sayings that we don't even realize that are very colorist. I know one in our community that's which is literally only the dumb and the dark, and the nighttime is dark, which honestly, before I never even looked into, like when I used to hear that, I used to just think, oh, okay, that's what she said. But now that I look back into it, I'm just like, oh my God, that's very hurtful to someone who's dark. So I think addressing those things through like storytelling rather than just health topics and Mercury does this and this. And I shared in the chat YouTube video that we created that kind of addresses more of like the emotional aspect of this topic.
Wonderful. Next question is more general, and I think it's quite apt. What do you want those looking to the future of this advocacy work to know? I think this is again a general question because if I should read the entire question, it says public health outreach around the skin lightening is notorious, hesitant, name a colorism and racism directly. Many have noticed the harm this feature this further contributes instead of focusing on loving oneself, harmful beauty standards. Yet we know these beauty standards don't exist in a vacuum. What lessons about colorism and racism have you taken from the organizing outreach campaigns around skin lightening? What is the future of skin lightening? And what is the tangible, lasting that you are experiencing doing this work? I think these questions are related because I think maybe Minnesota is the leader. I mean, a lot of things are coming out from where you are. So I think these questions can be addressed both as a kind of what you're getting out of this, and if you think that the health advocacy and outreach is the way to go, or maybe storytelling, or maybe both. So I will start this with, let's say, Fatou.
So I guess in terms, like you said, Minneapolis is home to, I think, the largest Somali community, and if I'm not wrong, the largest Hmong community, which are two of the communities that we see using the skin lightening products the most. And so I'm hoping that there's continued work and continued funding that goes into this, because a lot of it is surrounded by education, and education can't be done within, just like a year. And like we're working with leaders within the community, but even then, like that's only like a small group of people that they can educate, and then the work needs to continue. And so just continuing to fund it and continuing to put people out in the front lines. And the city, like me being I work for the City of Minneapolis Health Department, I only have so much say. We need to be in the communities and be working with people that have those relationships with the community elders and have relationships with the vendors, the small market vendors that are selling these products, to really do that work. And so like what was the other half of this question?
The other half is what the future of this advocacy would you like it to look like? So in other words, what are you taking out of this, and what would you like the future? I mean, what kind of initiatives do you think will be most advantageous in terms of moving forward, moving into the future?
Yeah, I think continuing on the route of education. I personally, and all of my schooling, have never heard about this within, like the US education system. And I feel like it'd be a very valuable conversation to have, or just bring up in, some topic, and it can be within, their health like their health units or something, but it should be a conversation. And that's something we're trying to do, trying to work with some of the school-based clinics in the Minneapolis public schools to see if we can add this as some sort of curriculum component, because again, if you start to plant these seeds when they're younger, you know, they can grow and transpire. And that's what happened with me. I guess I learned about colorism when I was younger, and here I am still continuing to work on it.
Priya, since you are in the media, what do you think? What would be some of the things you're taking away from this and some of the strategies? I personally like the melanin is not your enemy. I think that's going to be a logo for me. So
absolutely. I mean, I think it's, you know, exactly, it's about the education. I think it's starting early. It's starting in the family, you know, talking to mothers and grandmothers and aunts and talking about the way that they talk to about this issue and about beauty in this context. But I also think that a big part of it is talking to these corporations. You know, honestly, like, this is a money issue at the end of the day. And if people are not buying these products and if they're not making money from these products, then they won't sell them. There's plenty of lines, plenty of brands that have gone out of business over the years because, you know, their time had passed. And I just feel like, you know, switching, there has to be more pressure put on these companies, whether it's here in the US, in India and Somalia, anywhere, that says, you know, just changing your marketing mix to say glow or brightening or, you know, some other euphemism for bleaching is not enough. Because if you look at those products, I mean, it was shocking to me. My husband and I went to an Indian market in Gramercy in New York a few weeks ago, and straight there on the shelf, they were selling Fair and Lovely. They were they were selling like products with hydroquinone, with, you know, suspect ingredients, and nobody's regulating that. And I know that New York is not as far ahead as, like, you know, Minnesota and California, but they are, you know, probably one of the more progressive states that is working towards, you know, trying to understand this. And I just feel like if there was no demand, if there was no, it's like supply and demand. If there is no demand, then there would be no supply. So I think that there really has to be a little bit more of an onus put, and I know that's across the beauty industry in the US with EWG and like FDA regulation, like what constitutes, you know, what can you put on your skin or eat or all of that. But I think there just really has to be more pressure put on those people as well.
FDA has actually, I can read for you just straight from this book, by the way, you cannot get it. It's a $1,000 now, but this book is called, I don't know if you've ever seen this book. Have you seen it?
I feel like I've seen the title before.
Yes, the cosmetics, the American Great Skin. This is an old copy I bought when I was a grad student. I checked now online, $1,000 if you want to buy it. It's kind of interesting, but I just want to read you the definition of cosmetic from the FDA. The article intended to be rubbed, poured, sprinkled, or sprayed on, to introduce into the otherwise applied on the human body or any part thereof, for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering the appearance. An article intended to be used as a component of any such article, except in terms of not including soap. You can even see that the FDA is different. This is 1932. This was defined. It has not been changed. FDA can crush anything that say melanin busting because that doesn't fit into this. That makes those items automatically pharmaceutical. But for whatever reason, the FDA is not using the power that's actually within this power. That's one of the things I've noticed. So legislation is one of those. What other venues do you see that could be taken from this meeting, or that you think this could succeed in terms of moving forward?
No, I definitely agree with what Priya was saying about, you know, the hands of the law, I should say, in terms of the products that are coming into the country and coming into the ports, because some of these products as well come from Europe, especially France. So when they're coming in, they need to be checked. But also the media, you know, we have a big role to play in terms of making sure that we say Black is beautiful in all its shades. Because, you know, a lot of us would say that I faced more colorism than I faced racism in the UK growing up. So we have a lot to fight. Again, like I said before, decolonizing the mind. But again, that goes back to the media as well, you know. So I don't want to see my son's generation going through the same nonsense in 10, 20 years. So the media has a big role to play, as well as legislators. And it's an easy job to do. I think they make it sound like it's hard. All you have to do is check a lot of these products. I'm fine. People are not being fined enough, you know, so yeah.
There are so many questions left, but I think probably I will read this one. I have similar experience with Priya and Rio, and I have gotten a comment that I am not as dark as the other Indians. I think, you know, I live in Ottawa and I used to live in Toronto. This issue is very, 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 very much impacts my students, right? I mean, if I share with you my students' presentations, it will break your heart. I think for me, maybe I am the kind of like, I know the Somali older generation took a lot of rap today, but I have been on the trench on this issue and my heart just has been bleeding for a long time. And I'm very grateful to the state of Minnesota, to its legislator, to its activists, for this center, for bringing this issue into the public awareness and having this event. For me, I am like so grateful, it's not even funny. I am so happy, feel like, my God, because I remember watching George Floyd's daughter saying, my father will change the world. And I feel this is one of the ways that her father is changing the world. Here we're having this conversation, you know, so I feel, I know that when you're officiating, you're not supposed to say anything, but I think there, you know, do we still have some time left as far as the timing is concerned? Because I am in the Eastern zone and you are guys.
We have about 10 minutes for the panel. And I personally would love to hear about in all of your work, especially for our panelists, what has surprised you the most since you've been doing this work?
That's very important. I think what surprised me the most, which changed my life, because this topic changed my life, was white women bleach their skin, I must admit. And that actually affected my doctoral thesis because they want me to go to Africa and do some kind of ethnographic work. But I say, no, I am going to do the political economy using kind of Foucauldian biopower. And I think that took me to a different direction. So it directed me to the R&D, the technology, the semiotics, the high end, not the crude stuff, but the high end. And I think that was, for me, the biggest things I noted was the kind of different terms that were used. And the reason I was able to see what's going on with this stuff is that I started my doctoral thesis in 1998. And as these startups are like popping up everywhere, as you saw, I'm like downloading this. If you now go online, those startups don't exist anymore. But I really understood there was this crude stuff that everybody was talking about. And there is the high-end, nice stuff that nobody's talking about. That was, for me, the biggest discovery in researching about this topic. What about you, Senator? What surprised you the most when, you know, about this issue?
Well, it's an interesting kind of contradiction because I grew up in an era where you did sun tanning. So you actually wanted darker skin. And so there's that, you know, I don't know if there's like a compromised skin tone that's supposed to be the most perfect skin tone between, you know, Reina skin and Gunan skin. You know, it's just all this thing about what is beauty and the definition of beauty in our society. And that definition is evolving and is changing. Black is beautiful. You know, that whole effort to try to redefine how we view ourselves. And I agree that a lot of the focus on just your self-image and the dangers of the products is not enough. We really need to look at racism and colorism in a bigger context. And not just kind of blame the victim. Like it's just your fault that you don't understand that this product is danger, or you don't have a good self-esteem. We really need to look at how this happens from a very young age, and how young girls are treated and how they're commented on in terms of their skin or their body image or whatever. So, you know, the surprise for me is that I think it's kind of a broader issue for all women, but also that we need to have it in a broader context.
Wonderful. Priya, what surprised you the most about this topic?
Surprised me is how common it is. You know, one, that it's such a big market. I mean, the figures are outstanding in terms of what we're seeing, how global it is. You know, I think one of the big opportunities now is that they're trying to attract men into the market more and more, and that like it's becoming commonplace, just like grooming or under eye cream or shaving. And I think that it's affecting so many different people. And so I think that it's amazing to be here because, you know, it's not just one demographic or psychographic group of people that are working on this. It's just the power in numbers is what can really combat what the opposite is doing.
Wonderful. Aisha, what surprised you the most about this as an advocate, as a Somali woman in Minnesota, as young woman? What surprised you the most? What was one thing that, wow, I didn't know that?
I think what surprised me the most was just seeing how young women started, like maybe 12 or 10, that already are starting to use skin lightening products. And another one that surprised me was that males actually use it as well. It's just that it's not addressed as often or as focused on as often as women. So I think those two things are what surprised me the most.
I can hop in next. I think with a lot of the work we're doing with retailers, I think what surprised me the most was the quantity of the products that are available like in person. I think that was really shocking, going into these big malls and walking into the little vendors, and each vendor sells a different skin lightening product or something. And on top of that, I live on the University of Minnesota campus, and part of our campus is in Cedar Riverside, which is a predominantly Somali town. And so that's like 3 minutes away from me. And so a lot of the malls we're going to are in Cedar Riverside. And so just like the proximity of the products and how tangible they are was really shocking.
Well, I will tell you one thing that surprises me is that I found out that recently the FDA is using Somali language to warn the people. I think that is, for me, a great surprise and a progress. I actually put this as a part of, you know, the things that I am, you know, using for my book. And I think another thing that I find really quite interesting is the twinning of Minnesota and Toronto, because the people, Somali people that are actually primarily in this part of the United States came to Toronto first. And the other thing is, I used to live in Winnipeg, and so we used to drive in the Midwest. So I kind of like feel nostalgia for this kind of central time zone, you know, I'm in the East Coast. But I think too bad that the video has not been taped. But for me, really, it is very surprising is that the Center for Justice is taking this on. I think because, you know, legislator and discourse of justice has an ethical component to it. It's more than a legislation. So I was actually quite surprised at the beginning when I was invited to be part of this. Center for Justice, wow, they got a legal teeth. They can do something about this. And we have legislators also in this panel. So I must say I was delightfully surprised, almost like giddy about being part of this. And I said, wow, something is finally going to happen, because they used to kind of ignore me, you know, all those years, say, what about tanning? What about tanning? Well, you know, you can tan during the day and glow during the night. You know, there is no contradiction. So for me, really pleasant surprise. I might say, for the kind of the bold initiative that this center has taken was really for me the greatest surprise to say, wow, there are really smart people who want to do something about it. And in fact, it's coming under the purview of and the auspices of justice is very important.
Amina, can I just add in terms of my surprise? During my research, a lot of I think it's, is it Dow just mentioned about the marketing of skin whitening in Asia. And I found a lot of some of the products that are sold, like skin masks, face masks, the charcoal face masks, some of them have skin lightening elements to them. So it's things like that that we still have to check that are coming over from certain countries that are, it might not say skin lightening, but sometimes even when they say skin brightening and it's sold legally, it has got those skin bleaching elements to them as well. So that was a surprise for me.
So I guess it's closing. Who is going?
Yeah, that'll be me. Thank you so much, Dr. Mire, for leading our discussion with our wonderful panelists. And I'm just so grateful to you all for making the time to join us today and to participate in this conversation. And I will share that we've been streaming this conversation all afternoon to Facebook Live, and it will be archived there. So to all those who've attended today and to our panelists, if you care to refer back to our conversation at all, that is a great place to check in. I wish we could have spent more time talking. I think there's so much to continue digging into. And Senator Pappas, I'm delighted to hear that there is potentially a future with more funds to go for outreach and education around this topic. I want to thank all of our speakers today and all of our panelists from the morning panel. It warms my professor heart to see my former students have gone on to do such beautiful things, and that the work that they learned in the courses that they took with me, especially the senior seminar with the skin lightening focus with the Minnesota Department of Health, is really, continues to be a part of their work and their passion. What an incredible day. So thank you to all of you for contributing to our great understanding of this complicated topic. And we're grateful for you joining us today. Please stay tuned for our spring programming, which will continue to explore the topics of immigrant and refugee communities and health justice and the law. And with that, we will wish you a restful and well weekend. Thank you, everybody.